The clerk, please take the roll.
Mayor Baker.
Here.
Councilmember Danuski.
Here.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Curtis. Deputy Mayor Herbig.
Excused.
Okay.
Here.
Councilmember Marshall.
Present.
Councilmember Shrevenick.
Here.
If you'll please stand and join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. If there are no changes or modifications, the agenda will stand approved as written. Next item on the agenda is citizen comments. It's an opportunity to express your views on issues that are important to you and to the community. We ask you please limit your comments to 3 minutes. And please be aware there are children in the audience. So, clerk, please call the first person.
Alex Zimmerman.
Hi, my name is Alex Zimmerman. I'm president of Stand Up America. I come to you because situation what is I see right now in King Country, in Seattle, in the state Washington, make me a little bit sick. And I think this because Nazi social democratic mafia control everything about election. I have 5 elections, and right now I have 2 elections too for senator. But it's not a point. Point we don't have election. Situation what is we have right now absolutely critical. For example, we have a brochure what has come a couple days ago. In 7 August, we have election. We have less than 3 weeks and no forum. This happened before, and this is my second election, for example, for U.S. Senator. So now no forum, you know what it means. How can people know about you? Exactly nothing. And 30 people go for election. Each time, many people. People want changes because we have a pure fascism right now. Fascism, what is we have right now, more dangerous than Nazi or communist fascism, because Nazi and communists have a constitution. What is protects this fascism? It's America. We don't have this. We have a freedom of speech, a right for election for everybody. Is this a problem? What is we have right now? I give you a couple examples. 2 years ago, I go for U.S. Senator against Murray. No forum, nothing. Right now, no forum, nothing too. Last year, I go for U.S. Seattle mayor. So like 20 people go for election. I, in another 15, have only 6 forum. But Moon, for example, in Durkan, have 150. Guys, you understand about what I'm talking? I'm talking about something what is absolutely idiotic. And I have experience with Soviet Union. My family have experience with German Nazi. So situation absolutely critical. We need changes. How we can change this? It's very simple. This crook, Nazi social democratic mafia, control everything, don't give a chance to speak. Because it's come from private organization. And private organization is exactly part of this mafia. For this we have a problem right now in state, in King Country. So situation very simple. When you, for example, can twice per month give 2 hours to everybody, open door, for example, from 6 to 8, and everybody come, sit here, candidate from one side, people from another side, so there's not a control and everything under camera. So everybody see different opinion. We can stop in this mafia. We can stop in this fascism. Is this exactly what is I want to speak to you? Is this exactly what is we supposed to be start doing? Because it's come to absurd level. Another couple of years, it will be only Democrat state. It's idiotic. One party system is always fascism. It's very simple. Guys, we don't have election. I give you many examples what as you want, but I don't have enough time. So please, doing something very simple. Twice per month, open door here to everybody under camera, and everybody can talk. And don't forget, from 1st of January, you know what has been in this situation, 100 people will become and talking. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman.
Matthew Busted.
I am Matthew Bustad from Kenmore. I'd like to just
again repeat my opposition to the unneeded and counterproductive plastic bag ordinance. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anya Hellman.
Good evening. I'm Anya Hellman, a resident of Kenmore and pastor at North Lake Lutheran Church, also in Kenmore. First, I have more than I was planning to, so I'll try and keep it quick. I saw that on the business agenda tonight includes providing direction to the staff on strategies for the mobile home parks. And I was here 2 weeks ago when we discussed that, and I just wanted to say one of the things that I heard in those requests 2 weeks ago, multiple times it was stated that the current affordable housing crisis we have is not the fault of the mobile home park owners, which is true. I just wanted to remind the council that it's also not the fault of the mobile home owners or the residents of those mobile homes. And actually, I think their livelihoods are much more at risk and at stake. So I trust that you will consider that as you consider the best next direction. Secondly, related to affordable housing, I don't know if you saw, but in Edmonds right now, they are installing something called blockable units at the Edmonds Lutheran Church in Edmonds. And it looks like Legos, and it's meant to be easy, affordable housing that's also somewhat movable. I don't know too much about it other than what I've seen on some news articles, but they're having an open house this coming Sunday from 11:30 in the morning until 2:30 in the afternoon. I can't get there until 1:30, but I am planning to go and check it out. And I just wanted to make sure you were aware that that's happening and encourage you to go check it out also. As you know, at North Lake, we're considering what we can do affordable housing-wise on our property, and Compass Housing, which is the nonprofit that's doing the blockable units, that's the same nonprofit we're looking to partner with. So that may be an option for us. I don't know. And then lastly, I know you're also going to be reviewing the what was drawn up for tent cities, and then there's also a line in there now about low barrier shelters. And I just wanted to ask for if you could pick a date when we could have the low barrier shelter conversation. I think it would be great for those of us who want to be there to be able to put that on our calendar and remind you that we'll be having the shelter this October, so having a date sometime in October may be good, so it gives you time to come visit the shelter before we have the conversation. But if you could pick a date and let us know so that those of us who want to come and just talk about the statistics and that we know and the way that this particular shelter would be run, we would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor.
Kyla Wilson.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. My name is Kyla Wilson. I'm a staff person at Zero Waste Washington. Zero Waste Washington is a statewide nonprofit, and we work on environmental issues related to waste. So we do a lot of work related to recycling and plastics in the environment. And we're here today to say that we strongly support your leadership towards a reusable bag ordinance or a plastic bag policy for the city of Kenmore. As you may know, there are 21 places, jurisdictions, and communities across Washington state that already have a reusable bag ordinance. And Port Angeles and La Conner passed one earlier this year. Very exciting. And I really hope and I'm very excited that Kenmore might beat the next city. Bags are a really big problem in our creeks and for our wildlife. They're also a problem in our recycling centers. They tend to gum up the recycling facilities. They even end up in our compost. So this is a great first step towards protecting our native birds and our fish, as well as adding value to our recycling and our composting industries. So again, I want to thank you for your leadership, and I really think that you're leading the way in the North Shore towards a more sustainable community and a more sustainable Puget Sound region. And I hope you vote yes tonight, and we'll make Kenmore a better place to live and play.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson.
Sean Marshall.
I think about the other people that are here, the other people in the trailer parks. I think that we have other land for them. We have other ideas for them. We can make them go somewhere else, but it could be still in this area. We could make a deal. We could do anything. I even go on a car ride where every single day almost I see a big grass field that anybody could use. We could use that for land and use that for anything. We could use that for the trailer park homes. Or we could build affordable houses too on that land, or any idea you want it. I'm just saying that I have good friends at my school that are really nice, and they live in the trailer parks, and they're really nice people, and that's really, really cool because they're nice people. They're good people. Don't want them to go away. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall.
Ann Hurst.
I'm here to talk about the Land and Water Conservation Act, and to warn you, we compiled 6 documents. Different people had them from different public records requests and a Freedom of Information Act request. And they clearly point out that Daniels has to find more marine land. He's not provided equal marine land for what he's taking. And you guys need to be aware that if you take a play field and convert it to an active field that does not support passive recreation, anyone who goes into that park and creates something beyond passive recreation as an improvement, it will be considered a conversion. Do you understand what I said? Did I say that clearly enough? I don't know. When you go into St. Edward State Park and you say, okay, we're going to do this improvement. If it's an improvement that supports passive recreation, it's not a conversion. If it's an improvement that supports active recreation, it's a conversion. So you have to provide equal land, and not just equal land, but equal marine land. That's in the deed from the general administration to state parks. It's irrevocable. You have to do that. So add that to your $7.5 million or whatever this baseball field's going to cost in the park. Marine land.
Thank you, Ms. Hurst.
Excuse me. Vicki Grayland.
Good evening. I'm Vicki Grayland, and I live in Kenmore. I'm here to talk about ball fields budget. We have, some of us citizens have organized, and we have long supported the idea, the very logical idea, of working with the school district to provide more playfields for more of our children. Why is there so much resistance to this idea? First, you told us that the school district is hard to work with. We told you there's a new superintendent who's very open to working with the community. 4 of us went to the school district to discuss the possibilities, and they were very generous with their time with us. We discovered that there are grants that we can apply for together with the school district to improve these playfields for everyone. On February 12th of this year, Councilmember Joe Marshall, who literally represents thousands of people, citizens, moved to direct the staff to look into these grants. Not one other person on this council would second that motion. This was Abraham Lincoln's birthday. 2 members said, "I'm with you in spirit." Well, I would hope we can invoke the spirit of Abraham Lincoln tonight. I would hope that this council can call on its better angels and consider the common good and vote against the $7 million budget request. We've wasted too much money on this already. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grayland.
Cliff Braden. Cliff Braden. Ann Anderson.
Hi, my name is Ann Anderson from Kenmore. We don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing. I'm here today to be against artificial turf in our state park wetlands buffer. This week, my kids had Wilderness Adventure Camp at St. Edward State Park. It rocked. The camp director said it would displace, if you make an artificial turf there for $7 million, it will displace the camps going on over the summer where they can explore nature. So the camp director said it would displace all the 1,000 kids every summer, not to mention camp routes or all the other kids using the park. And I'm a special ed teacher, and I take my 18 to 21 students with disabilities, and we race in that park. And we have fresh air and trees because research shows that trees and fresh air reduce our anxiety and improve our mood. And you're going to take that now away from us for a special interest group to benefit only a small group. You want to put a fence around it with artificial turf? How are you going to benefit the broader base community? So you want $7 million should serve a greater, so we think that $7 million should serve a greater percentage of our kids and not take away from what we already have. The money should benefit our kids. So we need to invest in not necessarily land, but our kids in the future. Why did you ignore Arrowhead and Kenmore Elementary School? And I thank you, Joe Marshall, for having us research how we can partner with North Shore School District to save money. In the past, the city has said you don't want to partner with North Shore School District because it's not owned, the land is not owned by the city. And I've heard the mayor say this, I've heard project managers working on the ball fields. You want to invest, you don't want to invest in school land, you want to invest in city land. Now's the time to invest in our kids. It's just too narrow of a special interest group. Partnering with the school district would give us free land and space and more parking, and we wouldn't need to lease it. And so now we want to bring the cost down and benefit our kids versus the few served at St. Ed. So the council needs to please reset this issue and start over, work together to be constructive, collaborate for our kids. We have kids here tonight. And respect the park environment and the environmental laws in the greater community. Please remember Wilderness Awareness Camp. They're just sitting in a circle on the field. Please remember my students racing across the field. They're coming all the way from Seattle. And it's still part of the park. It's still part of the National Register of Historic Sites. We need 4 council members to stand up and reverse this process and right this ship, better serve our community as a steward of our resources, and keep this play field open to all users. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson.
Brent Anderson.
Hi, Brent Anderson, also Kenmore resident, wanting to talk on the ball field topic. Just wanted to start off saying, it just seems like a lot of money for what we're really getting out of this, and would like to go on record to say please reconsider before we plow through it with this. A couple of points that we've started hearing just being out in the community is from the girls softball folks, the coaches and players have been commenting that they're not at all in favor for that kind of a surface of the ball field. This was interacting with folks that were playing on the Bothell industrial park fields over by Home Depot. The other group that we've heard from is soccer players not being in favor of that. If they go to slide, for example, they get turf burns off of that kind of a surface versus preferring to play on natural grass. It just kind of takes away from their enjoyment of the game. And then the point that the fenced-in space gets to, it starts being a restriction for access by the general public. It's kind of, obviously fences are meant to keep out and keep in, so it starts to set up a wall, negative connotations of walls. I think we're somewhat familiar with that in the larger scope of things here. That walling off, I think others have commented, but the little point of that it's making it for a specific group versus leaving it a general space, a generic space that would be more open to everyone. So in summary, please pump the brakes on that, even to the point of just starting over and letting us get more involved and have a different plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Marissa Liu.
Hi there. My name is Marissa Liu. Today is my first time to be here to share my experience with the RV living in the residential area beside my side yard. And I already climbed this to the code enforcement lady. Her name is Debbie, and we have a conversation this morning too. She told me there's no regulation in Kenmore City. I was so shocked. As a resident at Kenmore, being like 12 years, I love this city so much. There's no commercial, anybody's, I don't know, my English is second language. Okay, just really comfortable area. But recently the real estate booming. We have a really good block watch program, but people move away because they are aging. And we have a new neighbors here, and we don't know each other at all, being a year. So I just have my first question about the code enforcement for the RV living in the residential area. Any permit needed? Any regulation, like how many feet away between each other? I believe her RV is only 1 foot away from my side yard, the fence. And now he's putting a sign on all his RVs say, no trespassing in my property. Private property, no trespassing. All facing my backyard. Excuse me, that's my yard. I'm the homeowner. And they are not the homeowner. They are the homeowners, someone's relatives, but I don't care that. I only care about the regulations. That's all I am concerned. And I also want to know, will city take this action, or how can I get it? Do I need a petition from my neighborhood, or we just leave it? I know people work hard, they get trouble, but I don't think the people bid the price to get a house, how many, $10,000 more, and rent the RV to someone else because they're choosing to be home free but not homeless. So I'm totally confused. All I need to do just want city to take some action, make the law, and of course, if you have a land, we of course can have a RV park, to have a campground site, to all the people have a fancy RV live there, but not in the residential area. All the packs, all the $1 million house except mine, because I have one 50-year-old house beside my first floor, the street, I don't know how to say, the 150th place at Kenmore there. So I'm so confused. Please help, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Liu.
Mike D.
Brought some props today. Howdy, Mike D. from Lake Forest Park here. Thank you for the opportunity to comment tonight. I was looking at your schedule here, and you got a number of things on the consent agenda. And I often encourage government agencies to kind of limit what you put on there. And also, for a number of reasons. One, I would suggest that you read some of these things. It's good things you're doing, good things that are going on, and you might want to let the citizens know about it. Also, I would encourage you to have a process for citizens to be able to pull things off the agenda if there's something that they'd like you to talk a little bit more about. I know that they could mention it at the comment portion like now, and you could consider that as a council or not, and vote, and if a majority of you agreed, you could pull it off. On number D is your economic development strategy. You could talk about the 6 great goals and strategies and actions that you're working on. Even the award you just got recently, that having to do with economic development. For number E, I wasn't sure what the acronym LEAP was, L-E-A-P, for your $500,000 crossing the SR 522 bridge, or pedestrian crossing that you're working on. I wanted to thank you for the public hearing that you had on the mobile homes, and they look like the proactive movement you were trying to make towards some of that. Kind of for preservation, we heard a number of people here were concerned about their homes. They were going to lose them. It was going to cost them to move out and even pay to dispose of them. So it's nice that you're working on that. I had an opportunity to watch a movie called Plastic Planet, and I thought that was helpful. You're working on your plastic bag policy, and I made sure to bring my reusable bags when I went shopping today, and even a reusable containers. So we're working on it there. King County gives out bags, and they fold up in these neat little things. And maybe, I don't know if you do that here in Kenmore or not, but I haven't been to enough events to see if you give those away. But those are available for free to people often. Thank you for trying to address the homeless shelters. I see you're working on the policy both inside and outside. That was kind of cleared up there. Enjoy your month of August off if you pass that. Thank you for addressing people experiencing homelessness issues in the city here. It's something that we don't quite do so much in Lake Forest Park, and I think at some point maybe we will. Also for your attempt at affordable housing options. We help pay for that when you offer a tax deduction or something as far as the fire district, if they don't have to pay into that or something like that, but I'm sure that works out for everybody. As far as your public works contract, I'm not hearing the same story from Lake Forest Park as I'm hearing from here, so it would be helpful if we could get that figured out. Whether it's you're cutting the contract or they're cutting the contract. It sounded like they were cutting you off, but when I hear on their side, it sounds like you're cutting them off. Conversion buyback. As far as the conversion that I heard somebody speaking about, as far as active versus passive versus active, oh, my time's up. Parklands, it sounds like you may have to pay back money. There's also the OSPI grant for Healthy Kids initiatives that you could apply for. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Dean.
Patrick, sorry, I can't read the last name.
It's O'Brien.
Oh, got it.
Patrick O'Brien, 6330 Northeast 181st Street. As you know, the baseball fields that you've got planned is on state park land. And $7 million is a lot of money to consider, especially since when the swimming groups were asking for $25,000 or $35,000 to keep the pool going, you said, that's too much money. $7 million for 2 baseball fields, somehow that seems more doable, even though you're creating super citizens by doing that. And what I mean by that is anybody that has a key to that gate can go in there and the rest of the public stay out. You can't even use that as a means to get to the other side of the park. I mean, so if you had egress or you want to get on a trail straight across the park, nope, the fence is there, it's locked, you have no business being there, you're a citizen, and you are pandering to a very small group of people where the state park, as has been pointed out, is passive use. You're creating a use that isn't passive, and you're using artificial turf in that project. And if you talk to the young lady promoting banning plastic bags, I'll tell you right now, if you've gone out onto an artificial turf surface, it's at least 10 degrees hotter than if you were on the same surface and it was grass. And on a day like this, if kids are out there playing on artificial turf, the reflective heat is going to be much greater. You've got all the environmental issues of water runoff and grazing animals, and you've heard quite a bit, and yet you've ignored that. Even former Mayor Caldwell came up and said he went out and personally measured the school district's ball fields that are in disrepair at Arrowhead and Kenmore Elementary. Measuring tape, they're all perfectly sized. They need money to fix those. And how many of you have ever played kickball? Kickball, show of hands. You can play kickball on a baseball field, and that's what they do at elementary school. You get out there in second grade, you can't swing a bat, you can't throw a ball, but you can hit the kickball on a baseball field and enjoy the field. And I think it's a much better use of already purchased land with minimal upgrades. You're not going to have to spend $7 million to upgrade the school district, who is bending over backwards to get you to spend the money there. You're not doing it for some reason. What is it? Do you owe somebody a favor? There's been public outcry through the roof of don't proceed with this plan at the state park, and you continue to just go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien.
Phyllis Finley.
Phyllis Finley, Kenmore. My topic is finances. The purpose of my comments is to request some method for informing me about the council's approach to budget and finances. I'd like to know what informs the council in terms of financial decisions, financial responsibility, financial transparency. I'd like to know where the public interest fits in your decision making. Here are some recent spending and saving examples that have me completely confused as to your MO. When Arrowhead Drive was recontoured by the school, an extra $30,000 was approved only for aesthetics, to keep the neighbors from complaining about the looks of the finished project. $3,000 was approved on the spot here one night for dirt for a church community project. A city tree fell onto my property, taking down overhead wires and blocking our driveway. Apparently, there isn't any money in the city budget for that. We were on our own. There's been discussion to locate public works facility in a residential neighborhood to save the city $2 million. I can't figure out a pattern. Almost $500,000 has already been spent on the St. Ed's ball field project. Now $350,000, in addition, will be spent for an environmental impact statement. The cost of the project is up from $5 million to $7 million as of today. No one, you, me, anyone else, believes that the project won't far exceed that amount. That's an enormous tax dollar per child investment. Not one council member was willing to second the motion of Councilmember Marshall to begin exploring a dual tracking grant with the North Shore School District. Upgrading every school field in the city of Kenmore would benefit thousands of children for a fraction of the cost per child. We don't need to pretend anymore that the St. Edward project is primarily for the benefit of Little League. That's common knowledge, okay, politics. But I'm wondering 4 things. Number 1, how can you explain that this is in the best interest of the largest number of Kenmore residents? Number 2, is there an upper limit to the amount that the city is prepared to spend on this project? Is the sky the limit? If not, what is the limit? Why do Kenmore residents not know this? Number 3, at what dollar amount, if any, for any project in Kenmore, does the council decide that Kenmore taxpayers should determine the appropriate use of their tax dollars? The Walkways and Waterways Improvement Bond included 5 projects for less than $20 million. Kenmore residents had the opportunity to vote. The St. Ed's project will likely be close to about half that amount. Number 4 of my wondering, why did the council want to vote for Walkways and Waterways, but not for the St. Ed project? And in conclusion, the council's financial decision-making process is difficult to understand. I'm requesting help with that. I don't need help reading your charts and your numbers. I need help with understanding your priorities and values that lead to your decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Findley.
Nicole Dixon.
Good evening. My name is Nicole Dixon. I am here about the RV parks. I wanted to, I have a 1967 mobile home, which means my mobile home cannot be moved. So I live in 7614, which is Kenmore Village. We are a Hispanic and African American demographic. We own our homes. We can do what we want with our homes. And if we aren't protected in some way from the owner selling the property, then those of us who have older homes cannot move them. I hear about a ballpark that's going to be made for $7 million. And when I come to the meetings, every time it's about low income. I am medium income. I am not a high income, but I am not low income. One of the things that was brought up was Spencer 68 and the cost of living, which I wanted to renege on that because a studio is $1,695, a one-bedroom is $1,595, a two-bedroom is $2,125. I haven't been able to find one for $1,000, which is what it stated on the addendum and everything that's been presented. Low-income housing is fantastic for somebody who makes that, but there's nothing for the medium. And a lot of us who are in mobile home parks worked really hard to be able to purchase it so that we could eventually become a homeowner of an actual home. And if it's taken away from us, we won't have that opportunity. Maybe investing a little money in those of us in the middle if you do not, if you're unable to protect the 3 parks that you guys are uneasy about, including Kenmore Village, maybe invest some of that $7 million to help those of us who can't move our homes and market value. So just think about the options, because there was 4 brought up last Monday, and all 3 of them were about low income, and only one of them was about actually helping those at market value. When we purchase it for market value, that's what we bought our homes for. And even if it's just a small amount, it'll help us to be able to move on with our lives and not be as hurt by the fact that the owner might be able to sell, redevelop, and kick us off of their land. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dixon.
Mayor, there's nobody else signed up.
Anybody else wishing to be heard? Mr. Hendrickson, if you'd please sign when you're finished.
No problem. John Hendrickson, Kenmore, Washington. I'd like to ask the council regarding St. Edward's Ball Field, how do we get to this point, and what can we do about it? $7 million for a 20-year lease on a ball field. After 20 years, you don't own anything. It's almost $1,000 a day. How much value per game are we going to get out of this $7 million? What's the cost? Why isn't that in your packet? Why don't you insist on that? When I was on the council for 8 years, and around 2004, I found a ball field built over at Woodinville for $25,000. The head of groundskeeping there told me mostly they had volunteers come down to help build it. $25,000. Didn't have good drainage, but $25,000. I went over to Froling's clearing and grading company over here, asked Ed Froling if he would help us to build ball fields. He said, no problem. Love to do it. I'd like to do one over at Kenmore Elementary. I'll do the grading, bring in the sand, and I'll do the drainage. I didn't know to ask about drainage. He was going to do a ball field over at Wallace Swamp Creek Park. At Wallace Park, the city wanted to expand it out into a wetland for 2 fields. That project got killed. At Kenmore Elementary, they were just against it. Brent Smith and the Little League were against it. They wanted to do St. Ed's. So if you look at the history that you have here, for the last 3 years, you've been working on this project. And it started in 2015, 3 years ago, with Brent and his lobbyist friend had the idea to threaten state parks by withholding permits for the hotel unless they gave us the ball field. Kind of extortion, violation of the U.S. Constitution. I gave you the case law on that. But no one had a problem with it on the council. And back in 2005 through 2008, tried to push through the St. Ed's project by using environmental exception permit, the PAW permit, illegally. No one had a problem with that. Apparently, no one still does. We have 2 new council members. You are stepping into the shoes, the legal term, of the other council members because you're in the middle of this project. And all this history, you own it as much as the rest of them because you know about it. And I think what you really need to do, and I've cited what I feel is abusive behavior, bullying behavior going on by Councilmember Smith with his Little League mob. And, you know, Dave isn't going to stand up to the Little League, you know, and then the rest of you guys follow. So now you're up to $7 million. You need 4 people that will show some ethics, have a conscience. If you could start over, do it right. Instead of cheating, do the same environmental protections everyone else has to comply with. Okay, you have Shannon and Wilson environmental consultants on call with a hydrogeologist. That's your starting point. How do you fix this? How do you reset, respect the ecosystem, the wildlife corridor, the wetland, improve the pollution discharge area, which encompasses the whole field, and build a ball field that works, that's affordable? Why do we need a lease? Can't you just do a grass ball field in there like it used to be, a good one? It doesn't going to cost $5 million like your packet says. Just baloney in your packet. It's to help you support the dominance from...
Mr. Hendrickson, we're at 3 minutes.
Yeah, I know it. From Brent. So start over with 200,000, 500,000, see what you can do. Bring some conscience and common sense into your process.
Thank you, Mr. Hendrickson. And Mr. Hendrickson, would you please sign? Anybody else? Thank you for your comments. We are going to be talking about the ball fields tonight. We're also going to be concerned with some options on the mobile home parks. And Mr. City Manager, could you please have somebody talk with Ms. Liu and offer some help on that? I know you've got capable staff, and I would appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. D, thank you for your comments, and we appreciate you taking your time out tonight to address us. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
And I'll second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Consent agenda stands approved unanimously. Next item on the agenda is provide preliminary direction to staff on preferred land use and financial assistance strategies for the City's 6 mobile home parks. Ms. Bent and Ms. Anderson.
So while we do have a PowerPoint presentation, but while Laurie is getting ready to set that up, and we also have Arthur Sullivan with us tonight from Arch as well to be available to answer any specific questions that come up. So the goal for tonight is to get council direction on preferred land use and financial assistance strategies in relation to the mobile home park project. The Planning Commission recommendation on land use options was presented to Council on July 9th, and response to most of the Council questions from July 9th are in the packet, and the few that are remaining will be addressed in the PowerPoint this evening. And last week, on July 16th, Council received information on direct assistance strategies, and the presentation tonight will show how land use strategies could be paired with the direct financial assistance strategies. As a reminder, there is a moratorium in place through October. So if the regulations are not adopted prior to the expiration of the moratorium, then there would be a need to further extend to allow completion of the project. If staff gets direction tonight from Council, we would then work on drafting regulations and bring those back for Council consideration in September. The Planning Commission did hold a public hearing on their recommendations, but there may be a need for an additional public hearing in front of Council, especially if Council direction is significantly different to the recommendations presented by the Planning Commission. And just as a reminder on the context of this topic, the affordable housing strategy adopted by Council last year, and the highest priority was to consider ways to preserve existing affordable housing. And the 6 mobile home parks represent a significant amount of affordable home ownership in Kenmore. And as you know, there are no regulations currently that would prevent or mitigate closure of a park. and a property owner could redevelop into commercial multifamily development. Staff are not aware of any immediate plans for redevelopment or closure, but we have heard from several property owners who are interested in selling their parks or redevelopment over the next few years. So the reason the city took on this project is to be proactive in considering different strategies that could either limit closure, make closure less likely, or address impacts of closure. And there are competing priorities when you look at options to address this topic, and they need to be balanced. And the presentation tonight will outline what some of these priorities are. And the question also Council needs to keep in mind as it considers the options is whether to preserve existing affordable housing by keeping the existing affordable homes in place, or creating affordability through redevelopment, increasing density, providing more supply, and providing affordability that way. So depending on how Council balances the priorities and addresses the question on affordability will lead you perhaps to a different conclusion on the land use strategies and the financial assistance strategies. So that's to kind of give you an overview of context, to ask for direction this evening. And so we have a PowerPoint presentation, and that PowerPoint will probably be about 20 minutes, but please feel free to ask questions during the presentation and then continue asking questions after the presentation. So I'd now like to turn it over to Laurie. Thank you.
Good evening. So the PowerPoint that I'm going through tonight was uploaded to your agenda on Friday, and so you may have seen some of the information. I'll try to not spend a lot of time with this to allow more time for your conversation. And if you do have questions, as Debbie said, I hope you'll interrupt me and we'll try to answer the questions. We've also tried to include responses to questions you've had in the previous 2 meetings on the topic in tonight's presentation. So as you know, there are 6 mobile home parks in the city. The 2 senior parks, Lakewood Villa and Inglewood East, are restricted to those 55 and older, and they're down on Northeast 175th Street. The 2 on Northeast 181st Street are quite a bit smaller, 9 units in one, 20 units in the other. And those are not age restricted. They're in an area zoned downtown commercial. Kenmore Village is on Northeast Bothell Way, and it is 27 units. It is zoned R24, which is multifamily density at 24 dwelling units per acre. It's also in the TOD overlay. And then the 6th park is the Lakewood Park, which is right next to City Hall here, 63 units, zoned downtown residential. So Debbie talked about balancing priorities, and we thought it might be useful to sort of go over the priorities. The Planning Commission discussed these generally, and we've tried to summarize their efforts. They looked at basically 5 different priorities. They looked at the city's affordable housing goals and strategies. Debbie mentioned the housing strategy plan. They considered the 2003 downtown vision. They looked at the city's general housing goals and expectations for capacity for new housing units in the city. They looked at landowners' interests, and they looked at homeowners' interests. That last time I went over the extensive process they had to hear from both the owners of the property and the homeowners. So with regard to the city's affordable housing goals and strategies, as Debbie mentioned, preserving existing affordable housing was a priority strategy in the housing strategy plan, which is what prompted this project. We've discussed how mobile homes provide a relatively affordable, unsubsidized form of single-family housing. They make up about 40% of all low and moderate income affordable home ownership opportunities in Kenmore. And 52% of the households living in the mobile homes have incomes less than 50% average median income. And many of the residents, not just in the 2 age-restricted parks, but in all of the parks, are over 65. However, a counterbalance to that is that more new housing may help stabilize rents, and the Planning Commission was concerned about that.
Looking at the 2003 downtown vision, two of the parks, again, those two on Northeast 181st that I mentioned, are in the downtown commercial zone. That is a zone targeted for commercial development, potentially mixed-use development. And the city's vision calls for a vibrant, walkable downtown with more dense housing and mixed use. However, one of the parks, the one on Northeast 182nd Street, is in the downtown residential zone, and the other parks are on the periphery of downtown and are already zoned for residential development. Looking at the city's general housing goals and expectations, the city, of course, has to meet its housing targets. We have a Growth Management Act responsibility to do that. And adequate housing supply does stabilize rents, and we've heard about that. We wanted to point out that the housing capacity in 2015, when we did the comprehensive plan update, was more than 4,500 units, and that's about 1,500 units above the city's 2031 target. Allowed bonuses that are allowed through existing code provisions, the residential density incentives, the TOD overlay, et cetera, could add more than 3,000 units. And if the redevelopment of the mobile homes was not allowed, that would show a loss of approximately 250 future housing units when you look at what the existing zoning allows. And that loss ranges from 8 to 95 housing units in the individual parks. Looking at landowners' interests, some of the landowners purchased their mobile home park as an investment, there's no question, with expectations of redevelopment. And public comment from those landowners supported incentives to preserve rather than requirements to do so. I think they were united in not being interested in something like an overlay zone. However, mobile home parks are an income-producing use. Some of the parks are close to the maximum allowable density, others are not. And TDR and fee in lieu are workable programs that the Planning Commission thought could compensate the landowner if redevelopment were not allowed. We've looked at incentives to preserve and know that they have not been successful in other communities. Linwood tried it and it didn't work. We heard then that the incentives didn't work because they weren't robust enough, but as you recall from last week, we've tried to look at what kinds of breaks could we give and couldn't find very many.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Yeah, just a quick question on that point. What do we mean by not successful? Not successful in
They were
helping
not
to preserve?
successful, right, correct.
Okay.
Looking at offering an incentive to preserve the mobile home park, that didn't work.
Okay, right.
Yeah, Councilmember Smith.
Yeah, so did that involve any of the options that we're considering on like fee in lieu of or TDR?
No, it did not.
Okay.
It included that list that Arthur went over last week that talked about reduced permit fees and that kind of thing. Okay, and then another priority to consider, of course, is the homeowners' interests. As we mentioned, all of the residents own their mobile homes with the exception of 2 that we're aware of. Many of them cannot be moved. They are unable to be moved. And public comment supported an overlay zone to protect both the mobile home park community and their investments. However, all of the leases do state that the mobile home park may be redeveloped and relocation assistance may be available. So the Planning Commission came around to the fact that sort of the fundamental question here is, and Debbie mentioned this, does the city wish to preserve existing affordable housing or create affordability through redevelopment? And the Planning Commission, again, was interested in redevelopment to keep the housing density at a higher level. They used a series of criteria, and you've seen this chart a couple times, but they looked at the size of the mobile home parks, how close the park was to the existing density, consistency with the comp plan vision, age restrictions, because they felt that the elderly were a particularly vulnerable population. They looked at the timeline, what were the owners thinking about in terms of redevelopment, the age of the structures, how many of those were post-1976, pre-1976 definitely cannot be moved. And then they looked at whether there were environmental issues with redevelopment that might make redevelopment more difficult. As we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, the recommendations for two of the parks, the two on Northeast 175th, were to focus on long-term preservation, either through the notion of compensating the landowner through TDR or fee in lieu, or through purchase of the park by perhaps even a coalition of agencies. For the remaining 4 parks, they felt that there should be no city requirement to preserve the mobile home parks. It would remain the choice of the property owner. But if redevelopment were allowed, then a certain amount of affordability comparable to that being lost should be provided in the new development, along with other financial assistance, relocation assistance, a relocation plan, etc. For the Lakewood Park, they added a third option, which was option 3, which again was to focus on incentives, if possible, to encourage the property owner to retain the park for some period of time. So I am now planning just sort of to go through each of these options in a bit more detail with information about questions you had, and including adding the new 5th option, which is the overlay. And so if you don't have any questions at this point, I'll just keep going. You okay? All right. So option 1, again, was long-term preservation. This is for the Lakewood Vista and Inglewood East parks. Lakewood Villa, I'm sorry. And option 1A was to use TDR, transfer of development rights, as compensation to the property owner, and in exchange require preservation. Option 1B was to use fee in lieu. In exchange for that, you would require preservation of the use, but you would also have to establish explicit affordability levels. Possible direct city assistance could include upfront financing or TDR fee in lieu payments to the property owner, and then loans or reduced taxes or fees if those would be useful. An additional question raised by the council was whether the park owner has to approve potential buyers in the park, and the answer was yes. To some degree, the park owner has the ability to look at credit, rental, and possibly criminal history of the new buyer, although approval to assign the pad rental agreement cannot be unreasonably withheld. Any questions there?
Councilmember Smith.
So how is that checked? Who knows what, does that become a civil matter then if somebody says that it's been unreasonably checked? I mean, because it seems to me that it would be very easy, I'm not saying it happens, but it would be very easy to continually deny on what could be rather nominal issues, and yet there's really no way to know. And if it's in the best interest of a park owner to be able to acquire the improvement at a lower cost, then how does that, it seems like there could be a real breakdown there.
We have anecdotal information that has occurred. We had heard from Ishbel Dickens, who represents the Homeowners Association, and she wasn't referring specifically to Kenmore, but she said there had been stories of landowners who did that. I assume that it would be an issue between the home owner and the landowner, perhaps with the involvement of one of the organizations representing one or the other. I did see the lease, at least with Inglewood East, that mediation is required, so I don't know if there's room for mediation. I don't know. Rod, do you have anything to add to that?
I have nothing other than the city could get involved in the enforcement process if it wanted to. I believe Seattle may have become involved in similar situations, but that's something that you'd have to do by code amendment.
I would just add, it wasn't my intent that I want us to regulate it, but it's to make the point that it seems like it does seem like it's a unique tenant-landlord situation that really creates a pretty significant imbalance that doesn't, it affects how the marketability of those homes are.
Any other questions?
So this next slide, I'm actually going to have Arthur Sullivan talk about. You had asked, the council had asked for an example of how the TDR process would work. So he has a couple of imaginary sites here, the Mobile Home Heights and Heron Vista, and so he can kind of walk through how the math happens.
So this was done purely in response to requests from last meeting. So we're basically showing a property, an existing mobile home park. It has 60. This is not based on any real numbers in your community. It's a hypothetical. So the existing park has 60 units. It's zoned to allow 100 units. So that means at this point there's 40 less homes on that property than are allowed. So under the conversation we had last week, we said that might mean that that owner, if you just did a 1-to-1 ratio, would get 40 TDR credits. If you were trying to account for differences in land value between sending and receiving, you might give them, as we were suggesting last time, 100 TDR credits. In exchange for getting those credits, they would record some type, there would be zoning or a covenant recorded against properties limiting future use to manufactured housing. So that's part A. The second part, then, now you have a whole community, and depending what areas you create, you may have a wide range of areas where you have your incentive programs where people can get above the base density in exchange for public benefit. So we found a hypothetical project. It's called Heron Vista, so it's near the nesting area, and it's currently zoned at 40 acres per acre, so it would be allowed 80 units right now. But they want to propose a project that has 200 units, which would be 100 units per acre, which is not, that's within the ballpark of what we often see in higher density centers in East King County now. So that means they need to find 120 bonus units somehow. So in this case, they would probably need a combination. One is, since we're saying you get 1 bonus unit for every TDR credit, and then in lieu, for every affordable unit, you get 3 bonus credits under your current code provisions. So one option we showed is that the person can go out and they could buy 40 TDR credits, so that would get them 40 of their 100 units that they're looking, 120 that they're looking for. They need 120 total bonus units. Then if they provided 27 affordable units on the property, in addition, they would get 80 bonus units for that, and that would get them a total of 120 bonus units. So that's one way they could do it, is a combination of both of those programs in the city. Another is that they might go out and find, if you did option B, that other sending site would have 100 TDR credits. So in that example, 100 of their 120 could be done through a TDR purchase, and then they would still need to do 7 on-site affordable units to get to their complete 20. Obviously, you could do different combinations of those, and then in each of those options A and B, the owner would be signing covenants for long-term affordability, and option A for 27 affordable units, option B for 7 affordable units. So, and it could play out in different ways, but this is just one example of how you would combine or implement a program such as this.
So I thought option B, we've just given up 20 affordable units.
Correct.
Okay. Deputy Mayor.
So if a seller only sells, say, a portion, they sell 50 of the 100 TDR credits that they have to sell, how does that affect their property long-term? How does that?
Once you give them the right to have the TDR credits, in other words, you could set it up that we're putting the zoning in place and you have the right, and they might, some of them might say, I want to sit on it 10 years. I'm willing to pay the game, and potentially make those wait for a few years so that they become, maybe they get more valuable. So we don't dictate when they sell the TDRs per se, unless you put in a land bank scenario where the city says we are going to buy them up front and we'll be the banker.
So the protections go in place as soon as we essentially give them the ability to sell the TDRs.
It could be created that way.
Okay,
right.
Thank you.
And if the person doesn't want to sell, then for Heron Vista, they would have had to have provided the 40 on-site affordable unit. They could just use the provisions currently for affordability to get their bonus and not use it with TDR.
And I might just add the comment about, well, we've lost a significant number of affordable units. The point of offering this option to the mobile home park owner is that, in fact, you are preserving a number of affordable units. So you've ensured that those units would continue to be available.
So as is pointed out here, in this case, you have those 60 existing units, manufactured homes, that are relatively affordable in the community. They would continue to stay. So while you've lost them in the new development, you've preserved some, so you've gotten a combination of both preserved and new potentially.
Councilmember Smith.
And, well, first, thank you for this example, because this is what, it really helps seeing this laid out in this way. And as I understand it, then, there's a number of variables. So we could easily, we can work with the ratio, like the option B, which is 2, but I mean, we could set that where we think is reasonable.
Right.
And then also on the covenant side, we can also, does that give us full flexibility too on how many units would be affordable units, or is that already something that we'd have to work within the
You
code
have those in
issue?
place now. So that 3 right now is what you have in place.
Okay.
You have the discretion to change those formulas going into the future and stuff, but that's the formula that you have in place in 3 different areas of your community now.
And is that set at the
in the
50%?
overlay.
Is in the code on that?
Affordability, it depends on how much bonus they do.
Okay.
It starts out at 70% for rental, and then if they go for a really large bonus, it starts triggering their ability to write down. Instead of having to do more and more affordable, they do the same number, but they start making some of those at low income.
Okay.
Now, right now, that's the formula. The 3 is the formula for your TOD overlay. In your other areas, you have a 1-to-1 formula that hasn't been used, and so one of the things I think the city needs to look at in general is if you want to create affordable through incentive systems, I think it's worthwhile that you don't have the same formulas for your downtown residential or your regional business. And I think and people aren't using it probably because that ratio isn't generous enough. And so that is probably worth looking at. If you want to explore this, that could be something done simultaneously with this. It's just a general program modification.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. What happened to option 2 here? Just a minute. Option 2 just sort of disappeared. Okay, here's option 2. Another long-term preservation option. This one is pretty basic. It means that the mobile home park would be preserved through purchase, and that could be from resources from the residents, private nonprofits, public agencies. In that case, if there were a purchase, the long-term covenant or rezoning would occur to protect and preserve the park. If public funds were involved, there would have to be explicit affordability levels identified.
Okay. And I'd like to add one point given the testimony tonight. The community, the mobile home community that was preserved in Redmond, not 100% of the units are income restricted for the residents. Some of the units are market, so that you can do a combination. It's just that you need to link, when you bring in public dollars, you need to have a value. Enough units need to be restricted in order to be comparable to the amount of public benefit being given. But we often do affordable, quote, affordable developments that have different levels of affordability and also some market rate units. And you could use the same approach with the mobile home communities. And in fact, the one in Redmond has 2 different affordability levels. I think it's 50% of median and 70 or 80% of median, plus it has some that are market. So you do have that flexibility.
Okay, and this version, the direct assistance that you heard about, was potential financial assistance, either a grant or a loan for property purchase or upgrade, and the fee in lieu could be used in a different way to support this option. So option 3 was extended preservation, and this involved giving the property owner financial incentives. Again, the use of public funds would mandate a public benefit, which would typically be affordability. The preservation, as I mentioned, would be the property owner's choice. We might be able to obtain first right of refusal to buy the park if incentives were given, and a relocation plan would be required since this is not a long-term but an extended preservation. Direct city assistance, you could reduce property owner operating costs. Arthur talked a little bit about that last week, and there might be room for infrastructure loans. So since this is one of the options where a relocation plan might be involved, you had asked what you want to hear about what is a relocation plan, et cetera. So we did a quick search. SeaTac, Auburn, and Seattle require relocation plans. Others may as well, but these were the three we found. They typically contain an inventory of the tenants, so how many tenants. They talk about mobile home specific information, such as condition and how many could be moved. A confidential listing, if the person is willing, of current monthly housing costs and annual income, an inventory of relocation resources, including available spaces in other locations, and actions the landowner will take to minimize the hardship. So those are the basic they differ all a little bit, but that's kind of the concept of the relocation plan. And those generally are required before you can start the 1-year requirement notice of closure. So you have to get your relocation plan in place and approved before you send out your notice of closure.
Councilmember Strobnik.
Lori answered my question. That was my question.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, option 4.
Councilmember Smith.
Oh, sorry.
Hey, thank you. I have a question. So I know this was the only option, or the only park was the one on 182nd that used the option 3.
Right.
And I'm curious about something, and that is, when I look at the Planning Commission, what they're sort of recommending for as options 1 and 2 for the 2 parks on 175th, knowing that that there's an investment made, obviously, when the people buy their homes, is it reasonable to think maybe like an option 3, sort of a hybrid, could work where there's a longer term, like maybe a 20-year no development period with some reasonable incentive, and then that way it gives property owners time to, basically amortize out the value of their investment a little bit. And I'm just wondering if that's ever been considered.
It was considered. In fact, that was one of the options that the Planning Commission considered in their initial discussions. The idea was that you would basically put a restriction on redevelopment for some period, I think this is what you're talking about, for some period of time, and then at the end of that time, maybe there was an upzone or something that would be beneficial to the property owner. So you got this interim period of preservation, so everybody would have a chance to know that a change was coming, and then to the landowner, you gave them an extra little incentive because of that. The Planning Commission did not move ahead with that option. They felt that, and because it would be a required option, it wasn't the property owner's choice, that they did not want to pursue that. So although that was one they considered and talked about and actually took to the public hearing, that was not one that they brought forward.
Okay, and so could there be an incentive other than an upzone at the end of, a sunset period on that non-development where maybe it is there's some interim tax abatement or something on it that maybe it allows them to have some benefit in that time frame. And then, and it also made sense for those 2 parks on 175th because their density was closer to what their maximum current zoning would allow anyway. So it kind of made sense that that's probably less apt to be redeveloped anyway in the short term. And so anyway, I don't want to throw a wrench into this whole plan. The way I started really thinking about that option 3 more in the last couple of days, and it seemed like it had a little more validity to the other 2 parks than I had originally thought.
Right. I think the Planning Commission, the problem that we ran into when we were looking at incentives for fees and taxes and that kind of thing was that we couldn't find a lot. I think an infrastructure loan, some of the parks really need infrastructure improvements, might be something, but then why would they take that as an incentive to preserve it when they knew eventually they were going to redevelop it? So I don't think we had a lot of success thinking of incentives that would encourage this extended preservation.
Okay.
It sounds like.
The other thing I would add to that is in terms of trying to find those kind of benefits, that's a public good, and so then it's private benefit for public good. So unless you link affordability, it's one of the dilemmas with home repair programs that the government does, like the King County repair programs, is the dilemma they have there is when they try to make those loans to property owners, they have to restrict the rents and the incomes of the people then in that property. And so now that's capping what they can do while they own it. So it's often a challenge to find these types of resources going to this situation because you need to link some explicit public benefit for making those resources available if you're using public resources.
I'm sorry, this question may be a little off track, but do you ever see, so when a property comes up for sale, does Arch or any of the other nonprofits ever consider actually buying an improvement in a park and not the park, but one of the homes in there, and from an affordability standpoint?
They have helped they do home repair loans on homes, but to acquire the home when you don't control land is not something that has been done.
Yeah, no, and I understand, and I would assume that would have to go with
Right.
a long-term rent lease on the pad, but I was
Right.
just wondering if that's ever been...
Right. The strategy instead has been to have groups like the Housing Authority or MHCP buy the park through a transaction with the landowner. That's been the primary approach.
Okay.
And that's been done probably about 4 or 5 times in King County.
I might, there was another sort of related question. This might fit better with option 4, but there was a council question related to whether or not a 3 to 5 year lease term could be mandated in the parks. Currently, the state law allows for a 1-year lease for the homeowners. And we checked with the city attorney, and that does not appear to be something that we could do within the framework of state law. So, okay, so option 4, this was the option that the Planning Commission was most focused on for the balance of the parks besides the 2 senior parks. And again, this was one where the city would not take any action to preserve the park. It would remain the choice of the property owner. You would upzone, in fact, the mobile home park properties with affordability requirements inherent to them that would provide units comparable in number, size, and cost to the mobile homes. There was some question about the feasibility of this, but that was the idea. And then the current residents would have right of first opportunity to rent the newly affordable units, and then others, maybe some temporary relocation assistance, a relocation plan, compensation for the mobile homes if they didn't want to move into the new units, or a longer notice of closure. Those were all things that were discussed relative to this option. Direct assistance would probably come down to relocation assistance, potentially compensation for loss of the unit. Those were the ideas that came forward. So this is the last slide. You'll be happy to know. Option 5 is one that a couple of you asked that we bring back. This is long-term preservation through a mobile home park overlay. In this case, a zoning overlay would be put over the property that would restrict use and would favor mobile home park retention. So other communities with overlay zones include Snohomish County, Linwood, Tumwater, Marysville, and Spokane. And Bothell, as we mentioned before, has had an overlay for 20-plus years. You asked whether there had been any legal challenges. There had not been. There were apparently lots of rumblings, but nothing ever came of it. You also asked, I think this was Dr. Curtis's question about the size, relative size of the downtowns. We looked at Kenmore's downtown and plus the TOD and Bothell's central downtown, and they were fairly comparable. But there is one mobile home park in downtown Bothell with overlay zoning. It's 97 units. And then 3 others are preserved on the periphery, 176 units. The other 3 mobile home parks with overlays in Bothell are at the north end of the city, so we didn't include those in this analysis. It's also important that the overlay, if that were an approach, would include a safety valve to address economic viability. In other words, if the property owner were able to prove that having the mobile home park was not an economically viable use, there would be an opportunity for a rezoning. And I will say that Bothell has had 2 applications for rezoning. Both of those were denied. All right.
Councilmember Smith.
I have a quick question. without the lengthy side, but what was, considering the Planning Commission did not use this as one of their five, wasn't an option that they
Right.
had, can you tell us briefly, recap why they
Right.
did not include that as an option?
So this, they did look at this briefly. It was one of the early options that they considered, and they felt that it did not provide appropriate compensation to the landowner. And the landowners certainly were not in favor of the overlay. And then one last council question was infrastructure maintenance in the parks that had an overlay. And the response was, this is a quote, "Just like all developments, most are well maintained, but others are not so well maintained. Depends on the individual property manager. The majority of the parks are maintaining excellent living conditions for the residents, and it cannot be shown whether deterioration is the fault of the overlay. The well-maintained parks have the same zoning classification as the poorly maintained parks. Further, the overlay does not freeze the park in its current configuration. Nothing prevents the removal of an old deteriorated mobile home with a brand new manufactured home." So that was from the Bothell planner.
Councilmember Shrebnick.
So just a quick question about the possibilities on the safety valve. So it sounds like the safety valve is basically gives the property owner the opportunity to come before the permitting process, basically.
You would apply
to
for a
argue-
rezone.
Yeah, to
Right.
argue their case, and they can do
Right.
that at any point.
Correct.
So they could do that right away or in 20 years. Okay.
Right.
So that's one piece. Is there ever, I mean, I guess, I don't know if it's equivalent to moratorium, but is there ever like a, 10, 15, 20-year overlay that sunsets? Or, I mean,
Well,
I think
again,
we're
this
kinda
is
talking about
similar to
similar-
Councilmember
It
Smith's
is,
question.
yeah.
That was an option that the Planning Commission considered at one point, that you would have an overlay for a more limited period of time that would sunset, and then
It was a little different question, because I think, I misunderstood that it was the incentive. I think we were talking about option 3 at that point, as opposed
Right,
to
but-
the mandatory.
Right, but you
Yeah.
could do a time-limited overlay.
You
That would be
can, okay.
mandatory. Yes, you can, and we checked with the city attorney's office about that. We checked with the city attorney's office about whether it was legal to put an overlay on to begin with. There were questions about, well, is that spot zoning, or is that a taking, basically, and the answer was no. So with that, we'll turn it over to you. Again, Debbie mentioned that what we were hoping tonight was to get,
So I think option 4, where there was the option for the tenants to have the first right of refusal on an upzone and new construction. My concern is, during that point where the park is closed and the new construction is being built, relocation and that could eat up relocation dollars and them not have enough to come back. I mean, what was the thinking on that side of things? I mean, obviously, they would want to stay here as close as possible because of their jobs and everything else, I would think. So what about that interim? Has anybody given any thought to that?
right, the Planning Commission flagged that as a potential issue, and that's when they were talking about temporary assistance while there was this interim period going on. I think one other council member had asked about moving existing residents into other affordable housing. And in that scenario, say a developer was going to redevelop the park, the idea was that as an alternative compliance, they could purchase another affordable housing project, move the residents in. I think probably the downside to that approach is that it actually is sort of a net loss in affordable housing. And plus, what would you do with the tenants who were in the existing affordable housing project? So those were some ideas that the Planning Commission discussed. But again, the idea was there would be an interim period. Could some assistance be provided for that interim period before folks could move back?
Councilmember Shrebnick.
I think that was my idea, was a slight variation on what you said, though, which is actually the park owner purchasing units, and I'm not sure how you do this when units are rentals, but purchasing units in another complex and making them affordable, units that would not.
Oh, market rate.
Yeah, market rate units and making them affordable, so you wouldn't have a net loss.
Okay. Comments? Thoughts? Directions? They're looking for direction tonight on what we might want to do. Councilmember Marshall.
I'd strongly encourage the advantages of incorporating the new option 5 for a preservation MHP overlay.
Councilmember Srebnick, and then Deputy Mayor.
I wonder if we could kind of segment the discussion, sort of in the way the Planning Commission did in the 3 components, since they are quite different. That might help us get further.
Okay. Deputy Mayor?
I was going to go the other way, and just to get conversation started, just make a motion to lay an overlay on all the existing parks and start the discussion from there. We can move from there. So I'd like to make the motion that we do option 5 for all of these existing parks identified in Kenmore.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All right, discussion. Motion on the table to do an existing overlay for all the parks. Councilmember Smith.
Well, I wouldn't support it, and I don't support it because it's a community issue. And if we do an overlay, what we have basically done then at that point is we've said, if you happen to have made an investment in a mobile home park and you supported affordable housing for all these years and you made what you believed was a prudent investment, now all of a sudden we're saying you're screwed. I mean, that's really what we're saying. And we have a community issue that we're now putting on the backs of, 5, 6 property owners. And I just don't think it's fair. It's a fairness issue. It's not. I don't argue with the desire of doing it, but it's just. I think as a city, we don't treat our individual property owners like that.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, and I recognize the concerns that Councilmember Smith has. As staff pointed out, when we gave them the direction to work on affordable housing. Our highest priority right here was to preserve affordable housing, and as far as I can tell, the easiest way to do that would be an overlay. Everything else could theoretically work, but is very theoretical and is somewhat complicated to administer. This is a simple way to keep those units somewhat protected. I understand that there are competing interests, but as I said last week or 2 weeks ago, if I have to choose between siding with the park owners or siding with the mobile home owners, I'm gonna lean towards the mobile home owners. That's why I'm making my motion. Thank you.
Councilmember.
So I don't know if I would support this as it's stated. I might be more into a time-limited overlay. I guess it's really hard when the Planning Commission had a whole lot of conversation on this and we're having a 5-minute conversation on this to just throw an overlay on it that quickly. For me, at least, that's a little bit hard for me.
Mayor, could I make a comment?
Please.
If you're looking at an overlay, you could also also add in TDR as well, to kind of as a compensation to the property owner for that loss of units. So again, there are ways to kind of create more of a balance in an option. So just kind of throwing that out there, that having an overlay, there is also the ability to have additional things added to that to create more of a balance, if that is the concern.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
That's actually a really interesting point. I also don't support this kind of just the way it has been stated, but I appreciate getting the conversation going, and I do support it in general for the 2 properties in which they're almost all the way to the density that we would get. And so I think we should strongly consider that option of an overlay for those two properties. And those are the ones that are on the Sammamish River. I really appreciated the way that the Planning Commission had segmented the properties, because I think they have very different underlying zoning. And that relates to the underlying kind of vision of the different parts of the city. It relates to the environmental preservation that needs to occur along the river. So there's a lot of reasons why I think they could be treated differently. I do like this option for the ones that are close to existing density, possible density already.
Councilmember Marshall?
And I also see a zoning overlay as perhaps more sufficiently addressing the equities in the matter. And I urge us not to forget the equities of the population that we're talking about, the park with the most families and the most kids and our most diverse population is Lakewood, right next door. And I think it's got the largest number of families and kids. And we've got to figure out some way to fairly balance that and not simply favor other options the way they might work out based on objective criteria, and as stated out, a number of objective criteria, and yet somehow the area with the most number of kids, largest families, and the most diverse one has some of the least protections in this plan. I know we can, and I don't discount anything the Planning Commission has done. In fact, it's impressive, and I think we can use many of their suggestions and advice in this, but we've got to do better.
So just a clarification on the density. Aren't there density bonuses for giving us some of the amenities that we want in part of this area?
Right. Actually, most of this area, the downtown residential and the downtown commercial, many of the city's zones allow they have a base density, and then if you provide affordable housing
Right.
is one thing, or park property is another thing, then you can go to a higher density.
Right, and certainly in the TOD, it goes up to what, 150?
Right, it can
From
go
a
as high
base
as
of
150
24?
units per acre.
From
Right.
a base of 24
And
units.
in the TOD, you can do, you have to do a minimum density of 60
And
dwelling units.
there's one or two parks in that area, one park
Only
in that
one.
area. One park in that area.
Correct.
Okay. Councilor Danuski?
Can you give an example of how the overlay with TDR credit option might work?
Just go back to the slide. I think.
Yeah, that option is really option 1.
It's sort of the 1B or 1A, I can't remember.
Yeah.
Or 1A.
How would the overlay part of it play in, though?
So if, down.
Where am I?
Down.
Right there.
And go to the actual example.
Oh.
Because 1B was a fee in lieu.
What was right, 1B, but 1A, if you go to the example, that's the next slide, I think. So basically, because as we said here, you do the zoning and covenant, is you with the overlay zoning, you would say each parcel gets an amount of TDR based on whatever formula you come up with. And so that landowner is given that, just like today, they have land rights now, but no one's offering the price they want. I mean, they could sell their lands now, but they haven't been. So you're preserving that land right they have, but you're saying that instead of you're using it to develop, get the land value for someone who's going to develop on your site, you make it available to someone else who needs incentives in another part of downtown. So you're trying to find ways to preserve that underlying zoning land density they have, but say instead of using it on your property, there's other properties. So that's why we gave you the sort of the looking at the capacity in the city to see if there's enough places that might be looking for capacity in the future.
So this would be the way to do an overlay, but yet give something to a property owner.
Right. And I can't say we've exactly found that example out there, but I haven't seen anything in my brain that I can rack in all the things I've done over the years that say you couldn't pursue or at least look at that option.
And if the developer or the owner didn't take the TDR credits, then it would just remain an overlay.
It's still, right. It's sort of like a right you've given them, and whether, just like now, they're saying they're going to operate their parks for 20 years, whether they're not using that land capacity now anyway, because the current use is of value to them. So here, it's sort of the same idea. It's sort of this latent value that's there that they can sell when the market's there. They just have to sell it to someone on another property rather than someone on their property. And then they get to continue their use.
So, but I think,
Councilmember Smith?
But so under that scenario, though, I assume then the zoning designations that we created in that downtown core become irrelevant, basically, because it's either going to stay as it is or you're going to sell the TDRs.
Correct, but it's relevant in setting how many TDR credits they would receive.
Right, but we know we will never have a greater supply developed on that site then, ever.
Correct, unless the city changed the overlay zoning in the future, but that would be at the city's discretion, correct.
So can I just add one more thing? I mean, I think this is a really important part right here, because this is kind of the crux of what the Planning Commission was getting at, is that there are differences based on 20 years of creating a downtown plan, and I think it would be rushing it to all of a sudden just say this is what we want to do. I think there needs to be a broader discussion then, because if we're going to set aside downtown core parcels with an overlay, that's a fundamental change of how the Planning Commission, how virtually every other council before us has viewed this. And I think it's important that it really needs to be a thoughtful discussion. Not that this isn't. And I would also add that I think it would be important to have Milton Curtis here, since he's been involved on the downtown planning thing. I think he's or the TOD.
Yeah, I agree. This deserves a lot more thought and discussion.
So I might just point out that we're not asking for the ultimate decision tonight.
Right.
There would
But you're looking for direction.
Right.
And
so
that's what...
Okay.
So maybe one question, given some of these comments, the commission did not land on a one-size-fits-all.
Right.
And so the question is, that might be a first question, is do you see you need to get to a one-size-fits-all, or might you have a little bit different approaches on different sites?
Councilmember Marshall.
And yet the impact of all the good work of the commission is what it is, and we do see significant impacts on our most populated and park with the most kids in it. That's where something that is universal might have a value. So a friendly amendment might be that we give direction for both those options to be considered in overlay with sunset, overlay with covenants and incentives combination, in addition to the other options. That might be one. But thoughts on that? I'm not exactly proposing it, but.
No, I mean, yeah, but there's no motion, so there can't be an amendment. So
There is a motion.
There is a motion?
Yeah.
What's the motion?
Motion is to do an overlay.
Yeah.
We did that one.
It's a friendly amendment, might incorporate the discussion I think we mostly had.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
Well, now I'm not sure where we are in the process, because I think we have a friendly amendment. So I had a discussion item, but.
I didn't amend it yet. I just suggested it. See if anybody else is interested. The motion still stands for overlay.
Well, again, I would agree with Arthur that I would like to, I appreciate your motion, and I would like to start where I think we might be able to get consensus, which is taking the different characters of the different parks and talking about them more in depth. So that's where I'd like to go. But we do have a motion on the floor. So.
We do. Yes, go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
And I just want to say I appreciate what Councilmember Marshall said there about, and this is something that's been bothering me since we started these discussions a while back, is putting different options in different parks. Well, it makes sense from a purely 30,000-foot land use level, does not recognize the inequity that we will be imposing at the human street level. And I think, the recommendations for 175th will end up protecting those parks fairly comprehensively, but we will be treating the populations that are on 181st, 182nd, and Bothell Way in a substantially different manner that I don't think will give them the same level of protections. And while I get from a purely land use standpoint and from the standpoint of the downtown task force and all that, that may make a lot of sense. But at the human level, we could be putting in a policy that protects one group of people, seniors who live by the water, and at the same time not protecting folks who are maybe younger, maybe have families, maybe are poorer, maybe don't speak English as well. And I want to make sure that we recognize that is kind of a decision that we're being asked to make right now. Like, there is from a land use perspective, I totally understand, 181st and 182nd is different than the rest of the city in the way that we're looking at the city long term. I get that. But when you get down to the granular human level, we will be, in essence, saying, okay, folks down by the water, you're fine. Everybody else, you're in a different situation and could theoretically lose the land under your house. So that's partially why I put my amendment forward, is because I'm looking at it more from the perspective of the folks who own these homes and are faced with possible loss of their homes and their investments of their homes. It's important that we recognize the investments made by the landowners also, but those folks are still going to make rent, are still going to be making profits long term. It may not be developer profits from selling their land to a developer or redevelopment, but they will be making a profit long term, one way or the other. We can't control what they are renting out pads for. But at the human level, there are hundreds of people and there are hundreds of families that could lose their shelter, that could lose their home, that could become homeless. And that's the issue that I think that at least I was trying to address when we brought up mobile home parks. Anyway, with that said, yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the concerns I have, is the rent on the pads, is they can continue to raise the rents and again cause homelessness. So
one thought, if there is sort of a consensus in interest in pursuing an overlay, one of the things that staff could look at would be sort of different iterations of that overlay that then council could consider applying to different parks. Mm-hmm. For example, you might have a long-term forever overlay. You then might have one which is sort of a not quite forever, maybe a little bit less, and then you might have a shorter term, and we might be able to put sort of things like TDR in with some of those options. So again, I think I'm trying to kind of figure out here with the council direction in terms of a particular option that they may like more than others, and then we may be able to pursue those as a staff looking at different iterations. Jump in any time here, Laurie, but I'm just trying to kind of figure out, help.
Councilmember Marshall, then Councilmember Shrevenick.
Okay, shot at consensus here. Hopefully not entirely from the hip. Introduce an overlay idea that has a combination of TDR and incentives and sunsets.
There's already a motion.
There's a motion on that.
It's already a motion.
But the motion is just flat out overlay. So
right.
Well, we haven't voted on the motion.
Right. So if I was looking for consensus as opposed to motion.
So there is nothing in the current law to keep the landowners from continuing to raise rates until their parks were basically empty, and now they have a good case to sell, right?
Correct. There's no rent control.
Right.
They're one-year leases, and they have to give a 3-month notice of a rent increase.
Right. Okay.
So,
Councilmember Shrevenick.
So I I like your idea. I think one of the crux issues for me is, and Nigel, Councilmember Herbig kind of alluded to this, I think it's, anything that can give the homeowner, not the park owner, but the homeowner some more predictability. So, and that's why I think the sunsetting, the requirement, but then with sunsetting gives both the park owner, I see somewhat less important, but the homeowner more predictability about what's going to happen. And that in and of itself is a benefit. And that also could, look at different properties differently. I am not saying necessarily that by segmenting the discussion that we would end up with different solutions for different areas. We might, but we might not. My suggestion was to segment the discussion only.
Do we want to act on this motion so that we can continue? Is everybody pretty much in agreement on that? So then the motion in front of us is to do an overlay on all of the parks, correct? All right. Clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Danuski?
No.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Councilmember Srebnick?
No.
Mayor Baker?
No.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
No.
Failed. Failed.
Failed.
Yeah, 4. Or 2-4.
Councilmember Smith and then Councilmember Marshall.
So, and I know this gets back to when we had the discussion on option 3, and it's sort of evolved from that. I generally like the way it's laid out by the Planning Commission, but I wouldn't be, although I don't think it's really good. Well, I don't know. I wasn't thinking this when I arrived tonight, so that's what I'm saying. But on the parks that are not on 175th, and maybe if there was, like a brief overlay, that maybe it was 5 to 10 years where, nothing could be done, where it allows those owners to recoup some of their cost. What I'm fearful of are these unintended consequences when you do something like that. Then it's like, well, how does that impact, for instance, when their pads come up for lease? And there's these things that I think one thing can lead to another, and it's like, if you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want a glass of milk. And this is kind of one of those things where you don't know what's going to be the next one. So I think it might be a good idea, but from a predictability standpoint. But I also think if we go that route, we really need to think about how every other component in the process.
Deputy Mayor. He already spoke on one.
Okay. I actually agree with Councilmember Smith a little bit. I do worry about if we have some sort of sunsetting overlay. I am concerned then what happens to people's ability to sell or move or do anything in those last couple of years with the unpredictable. Because there is a level of unpredictability then of, well, okay, the overlay is coming up. What does that mean? I mean, that's the same unpredictability that they're living under now, honestly. So I guess maybe that would give some protection for a few years. But I worry about what would happen in the parks for the last year or two under that scenario.
I guess I'm concerned with what happens to the people whose homes that can't be moved. Councilmember Marshall.
So I'd move that we direct staff to work on an overlay option with sunset clause, varying lengths of sunset clause, with TDR and incentive options and plain overlay.
Is there a second?
I'll second for discussion.
All right, moved and seconded. Various overlays with various options. Is that correct?
In addition to, that's an option 5, in addition to everything else the commission has introduced. So that would be in addition to.
Clerk, are you clear on that?
Yeah, so Councilmember Marshall, I have direct staff to work on the overlay options with sunset clause, variation lengths, TDR options. I didn't catch the rest.
TDR options and incentives.
Incentives, okay.
But you said along with every other option
And,
that's on there?
yeah, in addition to, so to work on that in addition to the existing options. So we can see what it looks like, or might look like.
Ms. Bench, you are looking perplexed.
I might comment. I think if the motion were to have us look at that, we certainly could do that. I think it's probably impractical for us to write code amendments related to a TDR, for example, or the overlay until we have a better idea of which is what we're trying to get to tonight, which direction you most want us to pursue.
Question on that, but didn't you suggest that you could do a overlay with TDR options?
Absolutely, we can. We're talking about the specific code amendments, and we can certainly do an analysis and bring back that information, but that would mean in September when we came back, we would not have code amendments for you to consider. We would have a more fleshed out set of options.
See, I guess I'm concerned that the Planning Commission spent a lot of time on this. And we certainly have as many questions as they have and others because we have to make that final decision. So, Deputy Mayor?
I mean, I think if I heard right, we'd essentially be adding like options 6, 7, and 8 to the list for a discussion further down the road. Is that how we're all kind of hearing this? We're not talking about writing actual code. We're talking about just...
It's a different approach. And
Right.
if you want to do that, obviously we'll do that.
Councilor Srebnick?
I just have a little question that is related to what David said, not exactly on topic, but what does happen? Is there any options for compensating, not just well, maybe you can call it relocation assistance, but compensating people whose homes can't be moved?
That is a direct assistance.
That is a
approach.
possibility.
Okay. It would be. Right.
Okay.
But, the city would have to consider whether that's a direct assistance step they want to take.
Understood, yeah.
All right, so we got a motion in front of us. Are we ready to vote on this? I guess this would add 6, 7, and perhaps 8 then to our options. So, clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
No.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
Yes.
Councilmember Srebnick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yes.
Passed.
All right. Is there anything else that you'd hoped for
So
tonight?
I guess we've got direction on information to bring back on the new options. And so I'm just going to ask, are there any of the options that you don't want on the table, or are we just adding to the list? Just want to confirm that.
Anything between 1 and 5 that we don't want anymore? Councilmember Smith, were you reaching for your microphone? No. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at.
Councilmember Danuski.
From what I've been hearing, option 3, we really didn't find any good incentives that would really work for option 3. That's pretty much what I've been hearing? Is that correct? So I think I wouldn't mind taking that one off the table.
I would make a motion to take 3 off as well. So if we actually need a motion.
I don't know that we necessarily
Okay.
need
We
a
don't need a
motion. I mean,
motion,
if
I would
we're
agree.
in general agreement, we're not interested in 3. And unless somebody speaks up, we're not interested in 3.
Mr. Mayor? I would also say that, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm misreading the room a little bit, but I haven't heard a whole lot of clamor around option 2. Is there, I mean, do we have a lot of support for option 2? Do we want to continue looking at that? Because I just haven't heard anybody really speaking. Yeah.
I mean, I haven't heard a lot of interest in 1 as a plain vanilla option either. I think if I had to choose between 1 and 2, I would choose 2. But so I'm a little reluctant to take 2 off the table, but I haven't heard any interest in the TDR in the absence of an overlay. And I don't know that, I mean, the property owners aren't interested. It's very complex. There's very few examples. I would say, if anything, we take 1 off as a plain option and only consider it with respect to the overlay.
Yeah, I believe I heard Councilmember Marshall in describing the current motion that he was looking at TDRs and that in addition to the overlays. And that.
Yes, in combination with an overlay. Yeah, no, but what I'm saying is taking it off as a standalone. Yeah, thank you.
So, if you may, I would be in favor of keeping that on. I thought option 1 had some viability, and since we don't know the impacts of if we do an overlay and what the sunsetting of an overlay might be, I think it's good to keep it on there. And as a matter of fact, I know it's maybe it just got struck from this, but I think even option 3, as we're having this discussion, I think to have all the options out and in front of us, I think is helpful. And I actually found option 3 to be more viable as I learn more about this, everything. And so to me, if it gets removed, that's okay. But I would say until we really have this nailed down, I would say we'd want to keep all our options open on this, and I do think it helps the discussion.
So unless there's 4 votes to remove 3, remove 1, Councilmember Smith makes a good point, and we should probably look at them all.
We keep them all.
That's fun.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. Can there be combinations of it's now sounding like these aren't discrete options. I mean, you could marry incentives from 3 to relocation assistance with, that's in 4. And I mean, you could mix and match these to some extent. Yeah, okay. So there is value then in keeping them at least in front of us.
So, I mean, this is a pretty big decision. And like I said before, the Planning Commission had a whole lot of time at it. This is basically our second look. So we're certainly going to have questions. So.
Yeah, I think probably the only thing that I would need to advise you then is that we probably will be coming back to you in early October, if not late September, to talk about extending the moratorium for another 6 months.
Right.
So.
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, and I would just say that I think when we come back and have this discussion, we need to figure out how to structure this discussion so we can reach a final decision next time this comes up. I think we're definitely behind, the Planning Commission as far as getting up to speed on all of this, and this is, our 3rd meeting talking about it. So I hope that we can figure out a way to structure the discussion when we come back in September or October to help us reach some sort of final decision.
Right. I think the Planning Commission found that going park by park was useful. Okay. I would recommend looking again at their list of criteria, and then when we come back with this more extensive list of options, if you do want to, I think, segment the discussion perhaps by park or by general area, Northeast 175th versus Northeast 181st, or however you want to do it. That seemed to work well, at least for the Planning Commission.
And I'm sort of getting that feeling here, too, with the group, that one size doesn't fit all, but we're interested in doing something. And I think the overlay plays part of it, but there's other things involved, too. Councilmember Smith?
Yeah, that's I felt it very much the same thing, because as a body, I mean, we need to at least know what park we're talking. If we can't even, that is the starting point, right. Because we're not, I don't think we're approaching this as an all or nothing for any of it. So I do think they all, there's multiple zonings for these parks, and that seems like the most logical starting place. And then we can work for it. And they're grouped together, so it's easier to, you've got zoning that's consistent in some. And
Right.
so, anyway.
What was that old movie with option this, you get egg rolls?
What's that?
Remember that old movie with option what, you get egg rolls?
I don't know.
So a little bit of this and a little bit of that was where we're going. All right. We got it? Okay, next item on the agenda. Mr. Urquhart, you're up. Plastic bag policy. I know. Yeah, it's going to be a sad day when he goes.
Better? Okay. Thanks, Council. Good to be here again with you. I don't have something to present visually tonight, but I will talk about the plastic bag policy. We will discuss the public hearing that we had 2 weeks ago and recommend consideration and a potential motion to approve the proposed ordinance on plastic bags bans. I will mention from our public hearing that there was discussion about the proposed ordinance, but you directed no changes to the proposed ordinance. And so with that, I'll just ask if there are any questions about it.
I guess with the 5-cent paper bag policy, I certainly support the ban on plastic bags. But unless we can offer recycled paper bags with no charge, I can't support this. Any other questions? Hearing none, the chair will entertain a motion to approve ordinance number 18-0465.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second. Oh.
I second it.
Yeah.
So,
About
okay.
half a second
Danuski
before.
seconded. Any further discussion? Councilmember Smith.
Yes, I'd like to know, when this came back to us before, we talked about the exemption, and it came up for a vote, and it was defeated. What I wanted to know is, since we didn't have a bill specifically in front of us that we were approving that night, can that motion come up again, or is that repetitive?
I don't know. I think that this is a new instance, so we do have an ordinance in front of us, which we didn't before.
That's what I...
So this
Okay.
could
So I
come
would,
up again.
with that, I would make the motion that we eliminate A of the exemption, and I just, for the life of me, cannot come up for a reason why we need to exempt people that are on assistance, public assistance. There's no reason that they can't use a reusable bag or have an alternative when we're asking the rest of the citizens to do it. There just isn't a good reason to me. So I would make a motion that A of the exemptions is removed.
Okay, so you got a motion for amendment to remove A. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is there a second? I'll second that for discussion. Is there any discussion?
I guess the discussion would be, why would we have that exception? What is the reason for it? I honestly don't understand it.
Councilmember Marshall.
I'd venture that it would be to give low-income people a break and make things much less difficult on them. However, I'm going to have a differing motion as to the paper bags later in this discussion.
And I guess I would object to singling out a group of people. by allowing them have a bag in the checkout line, which would call attention. And so, yeah. Any further discussion? So we have an amendment to remove A from the exceptions. Clerk, take the roll.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
No.
Councilmember Marshall?
No.
Councilmember Danuski?
No.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
No.
Mayor Baker?
Yes. Motion passes 4-2.
Fails.
Fails 4-2.
Right, right.
Yes. Or Marshall.
I have a motion to approve the ordinance without the paper bag fee. We did have commentary from prominent members of our community, most notably Ostrom's Drugs, which I certainly respect, that the addition of the fee would be an administrative difficulty. But I also see the paper bag fee as something of a regressive impact upon people who are low income but who might not get to the cutoff level that we've got codified in here. So that I would then move to remove the paper bag fee requirement from the ordinance.
Okay, so you got a motion here to remove the pass-through fee. Any discussion?
I have a question.
I'll second that for discussion, okay. Absolutely.
My question is, does that mean a retailer can't charge it, or that is it an option?
The intent would be that it's not required by ordinance.
Okay.
Just the ordinance does not require a fee.
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, and I'm going to speak against this. I don't see, I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe that the worry that at least I heard from the owner of Ostrom's was that he thought it was some sort of pass-through that was going somehow to the city. He's just essentially selling a bag for 5 cents. He's actually ended up probably making a profit off the bag. If the purpose is to reduce waste, if the purpose is to encourage the use of reusable bags, just allowing us to go back to paper bags, it's like we're going back to the 80s, which is better than having a bunch of single-use plastic bags floating around everywhere, but still isn't getting us to where we need to be when it comes to reducing waste. As we saw in the materials that Jack put together, paper bags do use up a significant chunk of, do create, they do use a lot of carbon resources that could be used elsewhere, significantly more than the plastic bags, although they can fit more. So I think this kind of goes against the spirit of the rest of the ordinance, and I'll be voting against this.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Same. I think it goes against the spirit of it, and it removes really any incentive for using reusable bags. So it's a pretty low bar. It's consistent. The way it's written now is a pretty low bar, and it's consistent with our neighboring cities, which has some value in and of itself.
Councilmember Marshall.
And I'd say then there still is a financial impact, even for that nickel, on people who need to pay that 5 cents if it's mandated.
And even Kirkland gives out paper bags, if you ask them. They do.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to clarify that, as I understand the motion, it would be to amend the draft ordinance before you by deleting section 8.50.020I. I guess I'll ask the maker of the motion, is that what was intended? The city manager has pointed out to me that if the motion passes, the effect would be that 8.50.030A, which you just voted to remain in the ordinance, would become, I guess, unnecessary. So that the motion would then have to be to delete 8.50.020I as well as 8.50.030A. Just want to make that clarification.
I think I is what you had meant to remove, right? It's just the 5-cent charge. Right.
Well, you don't need to exempt people from a 5-cent charge when you don't have a 5-cent charge.
Right, so the ordinance would be inconsistent, so we need to clarify that. I just wanted to point that out, yes.
Okay. So is there another way we should be wording this?
Well, if the motion was to eliminate I, then someone could make an amendment to also amend it to eliminate 030A.
Eliminate 080A?
Yes,
020A, okay.
30.
because they go together.
So,
30A, yeah.
Yes.
030? Okay. All right, so then, we have a motion. Does somebody want to offer an amendment to remove 030A? Hearing nobody, then we will go back to the original motion, which is to not have a pass-through charge. Any further discussion on that? Clerk, take the roll.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski?
No.
Councilmember Smith? No. Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
No.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
No.
Fails.
Motion fails. All right. So, main motion is in front of us, which is to approve ordinance number 18-0465, paper bag policy. Any further discussion on the main motion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
No.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-1.
Just to clarify, that's motion with no changes, correct?
It's a motion as written.
Yeah, as written. Okay.
All right, next item on the agenda is ordinance number 18-0466, temporary homeless shelters. Mr. Urquhart.
On this ordinance, we also had the public hearing 2 weeks ago, and we did make some changes based on your direction, and so I will quickly review those changes. As you may recall, we talked about specifying that this was for indoor and outdoor shelters, and so we've added language to the title and the definition of shelter throughout the proposed ordinance to apply to indoor and outdoor shelters. We've clarified the code of conduct requirements. So there was some confusing language in there about what was prohibited and what was required. So we've changed it in 18.100.200. We're looking at B2, G, 1 and 2. It now reads, a code of conduct which shall at a minimum require residents to agree to the code prior to being permitted to dwell on site and prohibit drugs, alcohol, weapons, violence, and open flames, prohibit loitering in the area surrounding the site, and establish and require observance to quiet hours. In addition to that, we changed the neighbor notice for the public informational meeting to 1,000 feet for consistency. That was an oversight on my part when we wrote the draft ordinance for the public hearing. because we already had the 1,000 feet for the original notice. And then we also made some non-substantive revisions to make the ordinance read more clearly. With that, are there any questions about the proposed ordinance?
Deputy Mayor.
So, excuse me, I just want to clarify that this ordinance as written right now will ban all low barrier shelters in Kenmore going forward.
That's correct.
Unless we come back and revisit that as a separate discussion later on in fall.
That's correct.
Okay.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
So I don't know if this is part of a motion, but there's two typos. One is in two, an application for temporary homeless shelter shall include, and it goes E and then E again. So that's one typo. And then the other typo is in section G, and you actually read it aloud. The second to the last word on G2.
Quite
hours.
Quiet.
So those were two typos that I don't know whether we need a motion to fix those. We can just say as amended.
Sure.
But then I do have, Pastor Anya said it'd be nice to have a date certain before which we consider the low barrier, and I'd like to make an amendment suggesting, and I think you say it in here that we're gonna consider it, but it'd be nice to have a date certain that the first consideration be no later than November 1st. And that would be just the first hearing of it, so we may not, be able to make a decision when we first hear it, but that would give us some time to line up any, expert folks from the county or elsewhere to give us some more information about that.
So is that a motion?
That was, sorry.
I'll second.
Yes, it was a very poorly stated motion, but the motion is to add the date certain no later than November 1st to have first consideration of low barrier housing, temporary shelter ordinance. And that does not mean we have to have the final ordinance in front of us. That means it's the first discussion of it.
So you said consideration.
Yep, first
which
consideration.
to me means to have an ordinance in front of us to vote, but you mean first discussion? Because we don't have an ordinance drafted.
Well, we haven't. Correct. Okay. First consideration of the topic. That's the motion that I've stated.
Okay.
But we can change that.
No, that's fine. I'm just confused by consideration.
Yeah, sorry.
Can I ask a question on that, just so I understand? Or is it, I don't know if it's open for discussion. Has it been seconded? So I'm just trying to understand. So does that mean, based on what you said, I'm not sure I understand Councilmember Shrubnik's motion now. So I think we want to have a discussion about it. So does that mean like it's an agenda item discussion, or is it actually a bill that comes to us?
It's saying that at least we have our first discussion of it no later than November 1st.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thank you for the
Okay, so there's a motion, and it needs a second to have our first discussion no later than November 1st, and it's been seconded. Is there any other further discussion on that? Councilmember Marshall?
And then consideration as an agenda item?
No, discussion as the agenda. It needs to be on the agenda no later than November 1st for discussion.
And with not necessarily a draft ordinance?
Because we need more information.
As you were, okay. Thank you for that clarification.
All right. Any further questions, discussions? Clear? So we want this on the agenda. The motion is we want this on the agenda before November 1st for discussion. So this one should be easy, a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So it's unanimous. Have it on the agenda before November 1st. All right. Now, back to at hand discussion of ordinance number 18-0466. Is there any further discussion? Councilmember Danuski.
Yeah, I missed the first meeting on this topic, and the way I'm reading it, one temporary shelter can operate at a time in the city, and you can't go back to the same location for 180 days. But you could end up having a temporary shelter continuously all year round in the city. And I was wondering if there was any discussion or, basically any discussion on, since we aren't through our first temporary shelter, if we might want to limit that to one per year to start out with, since we don't have any data on how successful this first one was, police statistics, neighbor comments, if the residents were happy being out in Kenmore. I'm a little bit leery of allowing one to be in Kenmore 365 days a year before we've completed our first one. So I'm wondering if that's been a topic that...
It has been, and I don't know if any decision was reached, but I know that very thing was brought up. But it's something we should really have a discussion of and settle it before.
Because I think I would rather have, just to start out with, one per year. And, if everything goes great and everybody likes how that went, it's easy enough to allow more. It's harder to, I suppose, limit it.
So do you want to make an amendment then to have it read no more than one per year?
Yes, I will make that amendment.
And I'll second that. Any further discussion? Councilmember Shrubnik.
I just have a question. So that would mean that a given shelter couldn't remain here just moving around sites
Right.
within the city. However, another shelter could apply. Is that right? Or are we
I was
saying?
just saying for temporary shelter, not Mary's Place, not the low barrier if we accept that, but just this temporary shelter ordinance, just one temporary shelter, up to 100.
Okay, so one of this kind per year. Okay, got it.
Just to start out with those. Yeah.
Councilmember Smith, you look like you. Okay. Any further questions? Okay. City Attorney.
I need another clarification, sorry. Is the proposal specific that you're going to discuss this further and come up with the language, or we're going to come up with the language, or is the proposal to add those words to the ordinance itself somewhere?
The maker of the motion.
I don't want to make the words because I'm not sure what they should really be.
Yes.
But
I'm not sure what they should be either.
I do have some words.
Let's hear your words.
Somehow I thought you.
Staff was asked this question earlier.
Okay.
So I guess I should ask the maker of the motion and the mayor who seconded it if you would like to hear, or anyone would like to hear, the words that I think.
I would love to hear your words.
Put this idea into the ordinance itself. It's up to you.
I would love to hear your words.
Unfortunately, it's quite a few words, but I'd be happy to read it and to give the city clerk a copy of the words later. I would suggest revising 18-100-200C, and I'll let you turn to it. It's difficult to
I got to find it.
find it because
This is a big one.
all the subsections are on the left side. But this would be C, and I guess that's on page. Let's see if I can find it.
I don't have it. I don't have page numbers on mine.
E.
2 A B C D.
Oh, C is, I don't have the page numbers, but it is
So, yeah,
the
it's
last
the
page,
last page.
the very last page of the ordinance.
Okay.
The very last section of 200.
Oh, okay. Where it says the following conditions shall apply to all temporary homeless shelters? That one?
Right.
Okay.
So instead of C, we would replace it with the following. The following conditions shall apply to all temporary homeless shelters. 1. Shelters are prohibited in critical areas and their buffers. 2. There shall be only one temporary shelter, parentheses, whether outdoor or indoor, parentheses, in operation within the city in any calendar year. Then 2A, the city will accept notices of intent to file an application for a temporary shelter during the month of October. 2B, the notice of intent must be for operation of a temporary shelter in the subsequent calendar year only. And 3, If more than one letter of intent is filed during the month of October, the city must hold a lottery for all potential applicants during the first full week of November. Actually, I got this numbering wrong in my draft. But these are all procedures about the notices of intent to file an application. Next, the potential applicant with the lowest lottery number must file a complete application and pay all applicable fees on or before December 30. Next subsection, if the potential applicant with the lowest lottery number fails to file a complete application and pay all applicable fees by the deadline or withdraws a complete application, or if the city denies the application, the city shall accept and process applications from other potential applicants in the order of the lottery numbers. Then the next full section is the city shall not accept, process, or approve any application for operation of a temporary shelter during the year of 2018. The reason we have all those sections is because if you only restrict the number of shelters, whether outdoor or indoor, to one per year, we have to
Make it fair.
make it available somehow to some applicants to file for the applications. And this resolves the difficulty of knowing when you're supposed to file the application, and the difficulty we'd face in that we'd have to set a date, and then what are we going to do if there's 50 applications at, let's say, 12:01 on December 1st? Those are all issues that are involved in your desire to have this be one per year. So that's what we would suggest. I apologize for the fact that when I typed this out, I had the subsection numbers wrong from my typewriter. But that's the essence of what we would suggest you do. And we could certainly, if you wanted to vote on it tonight, we could certainly make copies and let you look at them.
Okay, I will amend my amendment to read as the city
Language
attorney.
provided by the city attorney.
Correct. Ooh.
And I agree to that. Councilmember Shrubnik.
Oh, I think that's way too complicated and way too restrictive. I mean, that's assuming that all the shelters are lined up and they know in October what they're going to want for the year. I think that's really, really unrealistic and overly cumbersome. I think it'd be a lot easier if we just, instead of, just like change two words. In section, what is it, 3, that's where the 180 days is, 3E. Instead of saying cannot locate on the
Are you in with 3E in conjunction where we were?
It's
I don't
Page
have page
before,
numbers
okay.
on my copy. So it says cannot locate on it. Currently, it says cannot locate on a property until 180 days has elapsed. If you don't want more than one in a year, you do two things. You say cannot locate in the city, and you extend the 180 to 210, and you've basically got it, or 225. I think because didn't we figure that 180 gets us to 305 days or something like that? So you have to add a little bit more. So, and that would basically address the issue of only having one at a time. I mean, I guess we have a motion on the floor, but I'm definitely not in favor of it.
I don't mind re-amending my amendment. But yeah.
Okay, Deputy Mayor.
I mean, I'm generally not in favor of putting a bunch of restrictions on them at this point, but I actually think Councilmember Shrubnik's amendment or idea might be even more restrictive than Councilmember Danuski's idea, because then it would really, if one locates at one time of the year, then nobody can locate in the city at all until at least that time of the year or later the following year. And so then we're forcing things to be more than a year out from each other instead of just once per calendar year. Could be different, and it's a little bit more, has more wiggle room than making there be a 365-day separation between the start dates of two different shelters at two different properties. I just think we're really tying hands tightly at that point.
Councilmember Smith.
So I appreciate both of these and where they're going, because I think it makes sense. But what I'm wondering is, the way it's written seems reasonable, and maybe it's worthwhile to go through the process and see if we're having a problem, and if we are having a problem in a way that we really aren't anticipating right now, then maybe we can address it. And so maybe it's not going to be a problem at all, but just a thought.
Yeah,
Councilmember Shrubnik?
yeah, I'm not necessarily in favor of the motion. I'm not necessarily in favor of what I said. I just am definitely not in favor of the cumbersome proposal. And if the issue was not wanting more than one at a time, trying to figure out a way to address it, I don't think we need that level of restriction.
Well, I actually think the reason E is in there, what you discussed, was that was kind of the whole point of that discussion, if I recall. It was to try to have some control over it.
All right, any further discussion? City Attorney.
Comment. I appreciate Councilmember Shrubnik's suggestion on 3E, but 3 only applies to shelters on the same property. So what this restriction is that there's a waiting time for shelters on the same property.
Right.
That
I was
does not
changing that.
accomplish
Right.
what Councilmember Danuski is trying to accomplish, which is only one shelter of any kind in the city per year.
That's how I had edited E, was saying cannot locate in the city. That was one of the two edits to that.
But if we did that, would we be limiting then the ability of a low barrier if we passed regulations to allow a low barrier? That's another shelter. Would we be, by changing that, prohibiting a second shelter, even though it's indoor shelter?
3E or to the change to C?
I was told in general that no, it wouldn't limit the low barrier because that would be a separate ordinance.
Yes.
Is that a correct statement?
Yes, that would be the answer.
All right, so this wouldn't limit then. All right. Any further discussion?
Actually, I think I want to get just the spirit of my amendment out on the floor first.
Okay.
So I'm going to amend it one more time to just be one temporary shelter in the city in a calendar year, and then the wording can be worked out, later. So I'm just curious if there's even support for this.
Well, I certainly will second that. One shelter
I think it's reasonable.
in the city per year, and the language can be worked out.
Is what it would come back in consent agenda or something?
Yes. Not on the consent agenda. It would come back again for further discussion
Would be
and
consent.
possible implementation. All right. So is everybody clear? The motion is to allow one shelter per year and for staff to work out the language.
Correct.
All right. Clerk, please take the roll.
And this is an amendment.
Yes.
Okay. Councilmember Danuski.
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall.
No.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
No.
Mayor Baker.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig.
No.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Tie, so it fails.
3-3. Okay, so it fails. Okay. So we now then go back, and the chair will entertain a motion to approve ordinance number 18-0466. Is there a second?
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? So this is to approve the ordinance as presented to us. Deputy Mayor.
I just want to clarify why I'll be voting against this. It's not because I have a problem with the overall direction that staff went and the council went with addressing temporary outlet homeless shelters. But I am a little concerned with the process that we went through a couple weeks ago where we had discussed pretty explicitly not folding in the low barrier shelters into this discussion, and then we amended this to kind of explicitly get at that and add that in. And you know, I think we could have done a better job on the public side of that, and so for that alone, I'm going to vote no. But I think the direction we're going here is overall pretty great. So thank you.
All right.
I have a question or a comment.
Yes, Councilmember Danuski.
So I'll be voting no, not, I like 99.9% of this ordinance, but I do feel that we should start with one per calendar year, so.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Didn't hear.
I just said, yeah, just I'll end up voting no for this, not because of anything else in this ordinance, but just because I want to start this out with one per calendar year.
Councilmember Shrevenick?
Just a point of clarification, we are voting on the amended with the November 1 date, correct?
Yeah, that already passed.
That already passed, right, but I mean, it sounded
That
like.
was an amendment to this motion.
Sounded like there might be some question about that from one of my fellow council members, so just wanted to make sure.
Wait, I'm sorry. I thought that failed 3-3.
No, it passed.
That one passed.
So we have a date certain.
Date certain, November 1st.
Oh, right, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
All right. Motion's in front of us and to pass ordinance number 18-0466, dealing with temporary shelters. Clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
No.
Mayor Baker?
No.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Shrevenick?
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski?
No.
Tie again.
Fails again. Okay. Fine. We certainly need 7 council members here. This has been ties on about everything we've discussed, so. All right.
Can I ask a question then? Since you now have an ordinance that has been voted on and has failed, how do we bring it back? Do you want us to bring it back? When do you want us to bring it back? What do Robert's rules say about bringing back an ordinance that didn't pass?
Bring it back with the amendment.
Robert's
Yeah.
rule. It's interesting.
Council rules don't
because-
address it. I don't know that Robert's rules would apply. The statutes say that any ordinance must be passed by a supermajority, well, 4 of the 7. So it could be brought back, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so too. I agree.
You can direct us to bring it back when there's 7 of you.
And I think there's agreement to bring it back when there's 7 of us here, so.
That'd be fine.
And
Bring it back as is when there's 7 of you.
The November 1st amendment?
November 1st Amendment, yep.
And I think it'd be helpful to be poised to have Stacy's, Councilmember Danuski's concept written as well.
And just to clarify.
That was pretty prepared.
By November 1st. Not have 7 here if it goes longer than November 1st.
That's for the low barrier.
Mr. Mayor, I'd also like to clarify, my understanding of the motion on November 1st was that it was not a revision of the ordinance
Right.
itself. So that stands as a motion passed by the council. I just wanted to clarify, that's my understanding.
No, it's
Okay.
discussion of a low barrier has to occur.
Right.
Yep, good point.
You get your direction?
All right.
7 members have to be here.
Yep, so we do have direction to come back when 7 of you are here for this issue. Okay.
Mr. Arquart, thank you so much. You put a lot of work into this.
Yeah, did a great job, in my opinion.
Really did. It's not you, it's that we have differing
I
opinions.
have a point of order.
Please.
So where does that leave us?
With no ordinance in
So
place.
we are back at the temporary use permit for everything.
Yep,
Okie dokie.
way the votes went. Okay. Next item on the agenda, discussion of St. Edward project, ball field project costs and projected elements.
Mine thing isn't even loading.
I thought Rob was going to join me then for a minute, but here I am. So what I'm looking for tonight is a council direction on, not what I've got in front of me here, on the St. Edward's Ballfield project elements. I picked up, excuse me. Let's start over, shall we? So I'm looking for direction on the Ballfield project elements to assist in development of the 6-year park capital improvement program. The draft CIP presented to council earlier in May showed a total project cost of $5.8 million, and council asked staff to bring back a revised CIP, and I believe that is planned to be brought back in September. So to sort of inform that discussion, we then wanted to do a check on project cost. I think you all know that over the last several years, construction costs have significantly gone up, and we wanted to go back and look at that cost. And unfortunately, there has been a significant cost increase in the construction cost since what was presented to you last year. And in fact, it is a 1.92 million approximately increase in the construction costs. And several things have contributed to that cost. Increase in unit costs for materials, around 450,000. Items that were not included in that original cost estimate. Things that have been done to address review comments, for example, was another 1.1 million. And then if you look at costs for mobilization and contingency, another almost 400,000. So that's sort of what accounts for that increase in construction costs. And then when you then take those construction costs to then calculate the total project costs, you are then adding in things like sales tax, consultant costs, etc., which then brings you to the 7+ million for construction of the ball field. And the ball field then, that cost is based on synthetic turf, field lighting, parking lot lighting, bleachers, dugouts, etc. So just to sort of give some comparison, we looked at then what would the cost be if it was just a grass field with no lighting, no field lighting, no parking lot lighting, no dugouts, no bleachers, and that would bring the cost down approximately 1.6 million. I think that the surprise is that, you know, I thought it would be maybe a significantly lot less just to do a grass field. And I think what we found is really that the costs are comparable for drainage. We did look at the costs based on the drainage system which is proposed. There may be some cost savings if you went with sort of a traditional under drainage system, although our consultant was not anticipating it being millions of dollars saved by doing that. So that being said, we just wanted to have a check-in tonight and see if there was any direction on any specific project elements, if there was interest in cost savings of perhaps going with a grass field or eliminating field lighting or something like that. And that would then certainly help kind of come forward with the park CIP and also kind of give direction if we were going to make any of those amendments in the actual project description.
Councilmember Danuski.
When I was looking at the CIP that you have in this packet, I think that we had different direction from the budget retreat that said that we didn't want to take out debt for ball fields and was moved way to the end of the CIP ball field funding. And I wasn't at that meeting, but if I remember correctly, that was the direction that came out of that. Is that a true statement?
I think that is a true statement. But again, even if you were pushing the pushing the construction out, we still wanted to make you aware of what that overall construction cost would be to see if that had any influence on project elements.
Yeah, so I guess where my follow-on was on that is if we're moving all of this out way to like 2021 and beyond, we can expect the cost to go up again and again.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Does this affect the EIS that we're doing?
Yeah.
This is separate from the EIS discussion. So this has got nothing to do with SEPA or scoping. This is purely related to the project elements and its relationship to the capital improvement program.
I have a question then. So in the one-on-one, I was under the impression that this does relate to the EIS work and then articulating our preferred components that we'd like looked at. I guess I'm not understanding because we just had this discussion 2 hours ago or 5 hours ago.
Well, I wasn't part of that discussion,
right.
so I'm uncertain how to respond to that.
Can I jump in? So, so council shouldn't direct what alternatives get looked at in an EIS, but if you give us direction on project elements, then we'll know what we should or shouldn't consider in an EIS. Am I making any sense?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. So there is a linkage, but we just want to keep the linkage separate so that the EIS process is preserved.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Marshall.
So I think the first consideration should be is that we not prioritize it. We should be looking at fiscal conservatism and trying to save our money for the many pressing needs that we have, and looking at partnering with the school district to develop those fields. I think that should be our foremost consideration. In the absolute alternative, I think now is the time more than ever for us to change direction, right the ship in a better direction, and more fiscally conservative for a natural grass field with the most non-intrusive elements and fiscally conservative elements possible. That would mean daylight, solar lighting via the sun and the moon, not artificial light, and no fences, certainly no locked keys, no artificial turf. The natural environment of St. Edwards is the thing that we ought to really be prioritizing here, and I think those goals would serve us, these means would serve us in achieving those goals.
City Manager, clarification. Was there discussion on locked fences?
I don't think so. There is a fence in the plans, but there's openings where people can come and go. So there was nothing in our plans showing it being locked up and only accessible by a few people. It does show a perimeter fence, but again, it shows openings at certain locations with no gates.
Right.
So I guess I'm just curious as to where this, that you just brought up, this locked fence came from.
Yes. We heard it from folks out there, and I think we've also seen it in many of, for instance, the high school and other locations around, building. Once you start building this wall, build this fence, it's easy to cut off the public from its land. I think it would be too easy, and I think it'd be a fence would be a step in that wrong direction.
See, I see the fences and the locks on the school property, but I didn't see locks on the St. Ed's property.
I'd hope not if that were the case, but I do think that could move in that direction.
Councilmember Smith.
Yeah, I would just note that there is a fence there now, and it's actually a rather ugly fence. And if I recall, the plan is actually for the type of fence that is more aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah.
And so clearly I wouldn't be in favor of a locked field. I don't even know where that came from, but that falls under the, if you say it enough times, pretty soon it has legs, and I don't know where that came from. So, and I would say the costs are atrocious, but the costs are going to be atrocious wherever you go, and if you've got to build drainage, if you have to build fields someplace, then those costs, they're going up, and it's a discussion we've had for going back well over a decade now, and we're still trying to find a place we can stop losing capacity, and that's, to me, that's the foremost thing at St. Ed. It's the loss of capacity of fields more than anything, and then it's hopefully to have something that has greater utility. And I think there's a lot of options. I'd like from the EIS, I'd love it to be able to cover the spectrum of options so that we can try to figure out what works the best. This isn't a project for just Little League. I heard that mentioned tonight. It's never been a project for just Little League. It's for Little League, it's for girls softball, it's for soccer, it's for lacrosse. It has all kinds of uses, and again, but if you say it enough, apparently that makes sense. And I have not been on the board of Little League for 10 years, over 10 years. I haven't been affiliated with the league in any way, but what I am a proponent of is fulfilling the wishes in our pros plan and of trying to address a need that we still, as in 20 years as a city, we haven't been able to address the capacity. And this goes back to the Bastyr Field issue. And so, yeah, it's very disappointing on the cost, incredibly so. But I would say we're at a point in this now, it would be nice to at least get the EIS done so we know what our options are and what is possible. And it doesn't mean that in the future we can't better utilize our playgrounds at the schools, but we don't have a project in place right now for that. And we have something that generally the commissioners have said at the state parks that they believe this has merit, and I think we ought to proceed to at least get the information. We're this close now.
Councilmember Shrevenick?
Yeah, so 2 points. One, I agree with Brent that I would like to see the options laid out in the EIS, and the components in particular that we should look at is the on-off switch of lighting and the on-off switch of natural versus artificial turf and what that means. But I also, overall point is I don't think it's either or. I thought the direction that we provided earlier in the spring, and it's certainly where my direction would be to, in parallel to doing the EIS, to continue to explore with the district the options of improving their fields. And I think we determined from the analysis that you brought us that there is one field where that could occur and it would actually increase capacity. What we also found out was that the other fields are essentially at capacity. So investing in them doesn't really solve our capacity issue. It doesn't really give us any additional capacity. Mm-hmm. So I would like us to pursue the one improvements, talking with the district about the one field where we have the opportunity to increase capacity.
Councilmember Januski and then Deputy Mayor.
So if we were going to build a project on a school property, the cost would be fairly similar to what you have here, because there's no land cost in the St. Edwards, there's no land cost in, this is just construction of a ball field project wherever you might need to plant it someday.
Right. The cost presented does not include land acquisition, so it would be comparable.
And if I could just add to that. So, Debbie, you and I had this discussion, I don't know when, last week. I think you asked the designer, the engineering firm that did the estimating, is there anything about this particular St. Edward site that makes it extra expensive? And what was the answer?
Not especially. I mean, I think, you are dealing with proximity to a wetland, so you do have to, meet those requirements for making sure that you've met all the surface water requirements. But generally, the requirements for, detention and water quality and so forth are the same wherever you put a field. So there's still going to be a significant cost wherever you locate a field.
It's really drainage that is the big, it's that invisible stuff under the ground, just like a road project, that makes a project like this so expensive.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, I mean, I generally agree with Councilmember Shrubnik. I want to see as she said, the on-offs on artificial versus grass and lights versus no lights. I am really, my reservations on the price are growing as the price grows, especially since this is tied to a land lease and not a project we'll own outright. My concerns on that front are growing as we get more information, but I do think that we should go through the EIS at this point and take a look at those options, and that'll help us inform a decision. And I was always under the assumption that the reason for fences was just to keep the balls in the field and not going out to the road. So I never imagined, a fortress being built, and nor would I support that if that was what we were actually going to be doing. So I think we should scoot forward on this, but I am reserving the right at some point to possibly vote against this at a later date if we can't find something favorable that is going to get us the actual increased use that we want with the State Park Commission.
Councilmember Marshall?
With all genuine respect to everybody's position, from our perspective, it's still perhaps you can talk a illusory need into reality. If you say we have a vast shortage of ball fields in the city, we just built one at considerable expense up at Morelands. My kids played baseball the last, not this last year or so, but several years before that. I saw no shortage. I saw no dearth of baseball fields. If there's a particular dynamic for it or constituency for it, that constituency can always press for it and speak to the need. But and they have. But I think in terms of fiscal responsibility, we're really better served in turning the ship around and preserving the park as is, and working with the schools to partner.
All right. Eyebrows raised.
May I,
Please.
Your Honor? I think I heard more than one of you want the on-off switches for lights and turf on and off and to move forward. What about the things like the dugouts and the bleachers? In, out?
I don't know. I mean, to me, until we do the EIS, we're not certain where we're at, so.
Are those?
Well, again, we're not asking, this is not giving direction on EIS or alternatives
No, I
in the
understand
EIS. All I'm looking for tonight is that, based on the cost, are you looking for taking out any project elements? And what I've heard you say is that not at this time. You are concerned about the costs, but you don't want to give any direction at this time for taking out any project elements. That's what I've heard.
Councilmember Smith.
That's kind of what I thought it was. And on the bleacher thing, there had been bleachers there for years. And I don't know if the aluminum ones are still there or not, but they used to be up there all the time. And so it's not like, again, it's not like you're creating some new thing. You're just trying to make something that hopefully also is, has reasonable utility.
Councilmember Marshall?
So just so that you hear it, you may have heard of me already, I say take out artificial turf, take out artificial light, take out fences, make the project as modest as possible if we have to go in that direction.
If there are 3 other council members along with you, then that's what I'll do. But right now, I haven't heard that consensus.
All right. Have you got what you need?
I I think I've said, I've heard your concern about costs. I've heard several of you mention
Yes.
to continue working with the school district, which is sort of a separate, related but separate to the question tonight. And that as far as the project elements, that right now, in terms of the project, at least for capital project purposes, it will include all those elements.
Councilmember Shrevenick?
Yeah, it'd be helpful, kind of going forward, to have a sense of the contribution of the different elements. I mean, my assumption, I guess, is that things like the shift from artificial turf to natural turf and the shift to lighting and no lighting are pretty significant cost drivers, even though the overall difference is not that much, 1.6 million, like you said, or something like that. It was less than 2 million difference. But things like bleachers, I can't imagine, are a major cost driver. So, I mean, that seems kind of getting to the minutia.
Well, you're correct. Is that,
Okay.
grass versus turf, you're probably around $1 million there. If you eliminated lighting, field lighting and parking lot lighting, you're about $525,000. Bleachers and dugouts, about $25,000.
Yeah. Right.
So, in the grand scheme of things, yes, but those are actual physical improvements. So again, I was looking at things that you could easily kind of remove. And the only other thing I could think of along those lines was there was a plan for a small maintenance shed for storing sort of mowers and things like that. If you took that out of the equation, that would probably be about another $60,000. Other than that, I think all the other costs you would have to do. You have to do the clearing, you have to do the drainage, you have to do the mitigation.
Right.
There are very few other things I could think of to reduce the cost. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as that sort of the limited range I could think of on this project.
And I think, my opinion is for discussion purposes, it doesn't hurt to have it in there until we find out what the EIS says.
I do
even
have
though not
one
related.
other question.
Yes,
Yeah.
Councilmember Shrevenick.
And it was raised tonight by the audience, and I'd forgotten about it. But the conversion issue, we have no reason to believe that this would be considered a conversion, correct?
That's my current understanding,
Yeah.
although as it's been raised, we'll be following up on that.
Okay.
I have a comment on that, if you may.
Yes,
on that,
please.
Because if I recall, that issue came up like 8 years ago or 10 years ago on the prior plan, and there may be some information already on that. But the other thing is, it was referred to as passive, and in the classification and land management plan, it specifically calls it out as a recreation site. So I don't even think it's a conversion anyway, because it's not passive, and it was even recognized that by the Camp Advisory Committee and the document that was approved. So I'm not saying, I don't know what state parks will say today, but I know this issue, I believe, came up 10 years ago, and it was noted that it's a recreation site.
Yes, Councilmember Marshall.
And I would say that, and Councilmember Smith brings up at least a good point, Parks's opinion on it may have changed. So in fact, we may not know if the issue of conversion is an open question or settled question or not, and it's a very important one.
All right. Clear as mud?
No, it's clear.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Staff report.
Thank you, Your Honor. A couple things. We had every intention of taking August off. We thought we were going to come and talk to you about Lake Point on July 30th, but we're not going to be ready for July 30th. So we actually would like to have a special meeting in August on Lake Point. And looking at the week of August 13th or the week of August 20th, like a Monday, Tuesday, or a Wednesday on either of those weeks. And I know Councilmember Curtis is not here, but any fatal issues with the week of the 13th or the week of the 20th?
He wouldn't be here either of those? Is that what you're saying?
He's not here tonight, so I don't have direction from him tonight, but Okay.
I'm clear, but I prefer Monday.
Okay. Okay.
Works for me.
I
Okay.
prefer, yeah, so the choices are 23rd, 24th, 25th.
Or the 13th, 14th, 15th.
I would strongly prefer the 23rd, 24th, or 25th.
Oh, okay.
Um,
I just
25th is Saturday.
let me just look.
August? I thought we were talking about, oh, I'm sorry. I thought, what week are we talking about?
So the week of August 13th or the week of August 20th?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Oh,
August 13th, no.
and we can't push it,
First
we
onward,
we
yes.
can't push it to the next week at all, or the Thursday.
The Thursday, the 23rd?
Yeah. I could do the 22nd, but, oh, actually, no, I can't do the 22nd.
Thursday, the 23rd is an option.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think Councilmember Smith might be backpacking, right?
Very likely.
What about Thursday,
I realize it's August, we're not
Yeah.
probably going to get all set.
and what about Thursday, the 16th?
Be in Wyoming, my wife's 50th class reunion.
And is the week of the 27th doesn't work?
There's some reason why the 27th didn't work. Trying to remember why. Oh, it didn't work for Councilmember Smith.
Oh, okay.
So, well, we'll continue to hunt for a date. It may end up being early September if we can't find a good date in August. I really like all 7 of you to be there. So, okay. And I also like Jack Urquhart, our intern, to give you an update on EV charging station. That's another project he's been working on this summer. Just a quick 30-second update to let you know that it's moving forward.
You've been busy this summer.
I've been busy.
You ought to get some extra credit.
I hope I do.
Talk to your professors about that.
All right. Yeah, so we're just moving forward with looking into an EV charging station here at Town Square.
In one of the angled spaces there, on-street parking spaces, yep.
Yeah, by the side of the restaurant. And we're working with PSE. We're waiting for a little more information from them. If you know something about it, we're looking into a level 2 charger that would be smart. They're classified as dumb and smart. A smart charger gives you the option, if you would like, to charge, to make people pay for charging. It's hard to use the word charge twice there, but to pay for charging if we ever wanted to do that in the future. And as well, you can put some controls and some limitations. For instance, they could only charge for a certain amount of time, or it costs money after a certain period of time. So we're looking at that, and like I said, we're just working with PSE and proceeding with that.
And the vendor, tell them about the vendor.
Northwest here in Northwest Electric and Solar here in Kenmore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is this the one that PSE's agreed to pay for?
We will be working with them. They will participate, and we're figuring out how they'll participate.
Okay. Don't know if they're going to pay the whole bill, but we definitely want them to chip in.
Okay.
So I guess the only concern I would have is that somebody doesn't park there all day. Do we limit it to what the average time is to charge a car?
Yeah, so that's something you could do with the smart one is you could, well, as a city as well, we could do things. Cities have put signs up that say move on and after this much time, or you can control that it stops charging after a certain amount of time. So
Yeah, but if it stops charging, you don't want him sitting there
sitting
for the
there,
rest of the day.
right?
Yep.
All right.
Thanks, Jack. That's it. That's all I have.
All right. Comments, reports. Councilmember Smith.
I have nothing to add, thank you.
Councilmember Marshall.
I was interested in an article in today's or yesterday's Times about the homelessness population of Ballard having increased. And I thought, what a interesting challenge, perhaps, to both to paint extremely broad ideological brush. What a challenge to both camps of being tough and trying to make people independent and not helping them too much versus overindulgence, that we would have homelessness increase in Ballard when the city of Seattle seems to be doing so much or trying to do so much for homelessness, and yet we have unparalleled wealth in the region that we've never seen, and yet the homeless population has increased. Are there a number of factors related to folks? Are there factors related to folks coming from around the country where there is enough wealth because of this economic boom to share, and people know that they may be taken care of better? Is it a number of other factors? But at any rate, it was a challenge of a church that had really gone out on a limb a lot to provide a lot of services to people, and they were still experiencing seemingly more and more issues and problems. So it's my thought was stimulated to think, how can we think about more ways to help and or deal with homelessness as it may be appearing, and creative ways to deal with it from both the perspective of not overindulging people and also taking care of people, and the whole balance. Just a very broad thought. And then secondly, I was pleased to see that our SCORE contract, which is the South County facility, I believe, the jail that we contract with, added a position in personnel that funded restoration services for people who are mentally ill, who need to be restored to become competent again. There was increased funding for that, and the rationale from the SCORE letter said that there was going to be a cost savings because the less amount of time people sit in the jail, if they have mental health issues, the lower the bill is per night, and then these folks get involuntarily committed and or restored to another facility. So I was glad to see at least an increased funding for mental health issues in a very practical way.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Nothing much to add, but I can do the 13th if that helps in terms of a meeting.
Councilmember Danuski.
I'll follow up with an email, but Play Day is August 11th, and usually council hands out snacks. It's from 11 to 2, so I'll be looking for volunteers if anybody wants to sit at the picnic shelter and hand out snacks for an hour or two.
I will be there again this year.
All right. So I'll send out an email. You guys can reply to that.
Deputy Mayor.
I want to circle back to a discussion we had last week about notices of rent increases. I didn't quite have my stuff together last week to put forward a motion. So I'd just like to make a motion that council directs staff to put together a rent and lease increase notice requirement ordinance stating that notice for all month-to-month rent increases or lease renewal increase of 10% or more should be noticed by writing 60 days before the increase would go into effect. So I'd like to make that motion and get staff working on that.
So you want that at 60 instead of 90?
I'm trying to go with what I think will win. If we want to go, if we have support for 90, then I will go for 90. I'm fine with that.
I'm very happy with 90 too. I just think they ought to have the most notice possible.
Okay, then
I'd be willing to go 6 months or a year.
Yeah, I don't think we'll have support for that.
No. All right. So you got a motion then to have
I'll change my motion to 90 days.
notice for rent increases.
Yeah.
On the mobile home parks.
No.
Oh.
No. This is
Rent.
This is
Rent increases in general.
yes.
Councilmember Danuski.
I'm just curious how it works with month to month if you have to give them 90 days notice of a rent increase if it's only a month to month contract.
That's the way it works in Seattle and some other places. They just aren't able to. They give the notice and then they can increase. I mean, a month to month is assumed to be continuing usually, unless you give notice that they are being forced to vacate. So just be giving them an extra. Right now they have to give 30 days if it's over 10%. This would just increase that another period of time longer to give people more time if they can't afford the new rent to figure things out.
Okay.
But usually month to month, the year, it's guaranteed for the year. Higher. At least for the first year. I saw that somewhere in discussing rents and that.
That was an option.
No, this was something I saw in one of the forums that one of my affordable
So what's the
housing things.
motion is just to have staff prepare?
Yeah, have staff prepare.
Didn't we have a discussion of this already?
There was no motion.
No, well, we didn't have an ordinance either, so I'm asking that they put together the ordinance. We didn't give direction. So I'm asking-
Okay. Okay.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All right. Any further discussion? So the motion is on the table to require 90 days notice on rent increases.
No, I think the motion is to have
To
staff
have
prepare.
prepare that.
Yeah.
Prepare that. Councilmember Smith?
Yeah, I'm not going to support it. This is to me, I see this as a Pandora's box of where our city's going to get into all these different landlord-tenant issues that are already regulated at the state level, and there's county requirements, and I don't like this at all, so I'm not going to support it.
Councilmember Marshall?
I'm a landlord. I could, like to be able to consider the motion.
So, do we have consensus or to move forward, to bring something to us?
We have a motion on the table.
There is a motion, so
Yeah, I
let's-
don't think we have consensus.
So there's a motion, yes, so go ahead and take the roll.
Okay. I just want to be clear. It's staff to prepare an ordinance requiring a 90-day notice on rent increases, correct?
Over 10%.
Yeah, over 10%.
Yes, over 10%.
Okay. Councilmember Danuski?
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
Yep.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
Yep.
Councilmember Smith?
Nope.
Passed.
All right. So there's a few things. I met with the Business Advocacy Committee of the Kenmore Bothell Chamber last Tuesday, and I talked to them for half an hour, 45 minutes of everything going on in Kenmore. They seemed to be very appreciative of that interaction, and so I was very grateful to have that opportunity. Ballard Locks, we are writing a thank you letter to our legislators in addition to asking for more money for the repair. I think, Nancy, you can correct me, we got $13.5 million for the locks in this last session, and they're going to be replacing the crane and a lot of stuff on the large emergency closure. And we're looking for smaller amounts of money for next year to try to continue the work to bring the locks back up in modern day standards instead of 100 years old. And we got $650,000, I believe it was, for our dredge study from this last one, which was pretty exciting. That a couple of years ago, I know Senator Murray's staff basically told me to take a hike, and we weren't getting anything, and here we got $650,000. So that was pretty good to see. Also, concerts in the park have started on Thursday nights. If you have got the opportunity, come on up. Great music. It's reggae next week and Hawaiian the week after that. So anyway.
Coco is playing at the town square this Wednesday.
Yes, movie on Wednesdays. This Wednesday.
Go watch that one.
Go watch that one. There you go. All right. So if there's nothing else to come before us, we are adjourned.